I hauled my suitcase through yet another airport, marveling at how similar the tacky Christmas decorations at this one were to those in the previous two airports I'd seen this week. For whatever reason, some genius felt that playing Christmas music over the airport's sound system was a good idea. Just hearing Britney Spears moaning to Santa about her Christmas desire made me feel even worse. One of my suitcase's wheels was either jammed or not rolling, so I was dragging rather than rolling it. I checked in at the desk and discovered that my flight would take off on time. That was incredible and the best news of the week, yet it simply served to highlight how bad my life is. This is not how my life was intended to proceed. I quote, am approaching 40. I'm stuck in a dead-end career, divorced without choice, and on the verge of melancholy. I haven't gone on a date in 2 months. Unless you count the 2 nights. Last week, I fell asleep in front of the television with my cat. I believe this should count because it is a male cat, which makes him a member of the opposite sex, and he acts just like a man. He tried as soon as we finished eating. Copperfield. I was partly asleep when I saw the cat had an intense expression on his face and began rubbing my left boob. Okay. I dropped tuna from my sandwich on it, but he was still trying to feel me, per my life plan. I should be working on my second perfect child right now. Instead of making my way through another airport. Holidays are the worst time to fly. I suppose it's because of all the joyful, smiling faces. All of these individuals are leaving to spend time with their families, while I am simply trying to put food on the table and pay the bills. As I sit in the lounge, waiting to be called to board my plane, I look around the boarding area. The decor appears to be identical to that of 100 other such areas. I've been doing this for so long that all airports and motels seem the same to me. I see him out of the corner of my eye as I reach for my purse to retrieve my phone. A guy a few years younger than me approaches me and smiles. He quote probably around 35. I wish I'd grabbed my compact instead of the phone to avoid smudging my makeup, but damn it, he's the one smiling at me. If he didn't like what he saw, he would not be smiling. Perhaps if he were attempting to sell me anything. I sit up straight and gaze at him as he approaches. He isn't bad looking. His hair is pale blonde. I prefer darker hair on men, but I can't afford to be picky. Until he lit up. When he glanced at me, I began to wonder whether I had gone too far. He slows down as he gets closer to me, and I smile. I don't show him my full 1,000-megawatt smile because I don't want him to think I'm desperate or professional. I simply give him the friendly version. Hi, I say happily as he approaches. He stares at me curiously and walks straight past me as my surprise wears off. I notice that his smile and the way his face lit up were not intended for me. Have you missed me? He asks the woman standing just behind me. She responds pleasantly. That was the woman that spoke with you? She asks. I don't know. He shrugs. I suppose she's just a strange old airport woman. Let us go home so I can show you how much I miss you. I can't wait, she exclaims. We may not make it all the way home as the happy pair walks away from me. I can't help but grind my teeth. I despise that witch. Then I knew it was only my jealousy rising to the surface of my mind. She was soaking in and appreciating the fact that she had a partner who loved her. He adored her so much that being apart from her made him desire to see her again. They return home and try to screw each other's brains out, but there's more to it than that. Their union would be full of love and sharing. They would literally open themselves to one another and share their souls. It would be far more than just two healthy people slapping each other till they expelled fluids. That kind of thing was quite unique. Maybe I was envious of the witch, but I didn't really despise her. I used to be her, and there is the problem. I knew exactly what she had, and I would do anything to get it back. The fact that, unlike me, she knew what she had and treasured it after they went was almost enough to make me hate her. I glanced around at the other passengers in the boarding area. Several of them stared at me sheepishly. They presumably witnessed my awkward little drama as it occurred. Well, I was relieved that my discomfort and very human error may provide some delight or laughter to their lives rather than seeing me shame myself. I was certain that none of them would have given me another look. I guess I was approaching the age when ladies developed their distinctive abilities. Apparently mine were kicking in early for women over 40, unless they are very attractive, well-built, or wealthy. I'll gain the power of invisibility. Only our relatives are immune to our powers. Everyone else can stare directly at us and not see us. Once we understand that old young men do not regard sex objects, and since they do, we rarely exist. Young women do not want to be like us, so we don't exist in their universe. Men our age desire younger women, and we don't want men who are significantly older than us. The irony is that if given the option, guys who are older than us would prefer younger women as well, provided they were available. As the flight's departure time approaches, the boarding area swiftly fills. As the seating area fills up, I pull my briefcase and purse closer to me. This is perhaps the fourth time this week that I have wondered about my family. What became of us after my parents died? We tend to lose track of one another. I have a brother and a sister out there somewhere. I do not know their phone numbers or where they live. Okay, that's not quite accurate. My sister resides somewhere in the South and my brother is in prison. I'm not sure which one, but I know he'll stay there for a while. He was caught doing something with narcotics. He was also meant to be the smartest one. I also have dim memories of other aunts and possibly an uncle who are still living, but I wouldn't know where to look. I suppose what got me thinking about all of this was that corny movie I woke up and watched one night last week while my cat was taking a break from fondling my tuna-smeared tits. It was one of those films in which the spirit of Christmas grants a desire to a man who nearly died while attempting to save an elderly woman. I'm telling you, it was hokey. I know most of you thought the guy asked for $1 gazillion, right? Not 1 million, not 1 billion, $1 gazillion, correct. Enough money to buy your own country as well as enough people to live there. But nah. He simply desired one thing. Stop me if you've seen this film. All he wanted was a wonderful Christmas with his family. Again, like me, his family was dispersed all over the place. They had their own lives, occupations, and children, as well as all of the other stuff that comes with being human. Over time, they grew apart and became strangers. They only met when someone died, and only for the funeral, and to decide who received what from the deceased relative. Shit. I guess in my own way I've been wondering if things like that actually happen, and if they do they happen to folks like me? Because above all things, I wish I could make my own Christmas wish like that moron from the movie. And no, I would not squander my money either. Do not get me wrong. I do not want world peace. The world economy is already in horrible shape. We could use a decent conflict right now to kick everything back up. And if you think I wish to reunify my family, you're mistaken. That bunch of losers and freeloaders should stay away from me if they know what's best for them. I just have one wish. Surprisingly, I threw it away carelessly myself. Shit. Stupid teenage ladies who don't look where they're going should be killed. The little witches are as large as I am, and she basically trampled my foot and started walking. Holy shit. She is bigger than I am. Was my bomb as huge when I was her age? And the tiny one who didn't have the courtesy to even apologize. She just passed by, displaying her buddy a poster of a little child she had purchased at the gift store. Who the hell is Justine Bieber? Oh, Justin Bieber. He's a dude. I remember him now. We had another version of him around 3 or 4 years ago. Yep. Only then was he known as Jesse McCarthy. Shit. At least Jesse got a hit. What was the name of the song? Oh yes, it was called How Do You Sleep. I played that song a while ago. It helped to alleviate my problem, but it's now been a year. Okay, back to my one wish. If I could have one wish, it would be to have the opportunity to reconcile with my ex. Just like the lyrics to that song. It's been approximately a year. I haven't seen or heard from you. I've been missing you terribly. How do you sleep? Garrett raised a lot of questions in my mind. I wondered if he ever thought of me. I wondered if he had missed me. I wondered if he regretted the way he threw away our marriage, if he could do it all over again. What have you given me? A second opportunity. According to statistics, the majority of people are unhappy following their divorce. I know I am. However, they claim that even those who sought the divorces are dissatisfied. 8 out of 10 divorcees think that if they were to do it again, they would work harder to keep their marriages together. I was curious if Gerald felt like that more than anything else. I miss him at night and in the morning when I first get up. I'm not only talking about sex. However, the sex with Gerald was incredible. More than anything. I miss having that man lie down, throw his arms around me, and hug me all night. Nothing else mattered once I was in his arms. The bills did not matter. The job did not matter. Nothing happened, even on days when he went for a run and then collapsed into bed, still sweating. I crave that man's touch. I know he loved me. He was a really attractive man who was also extremely intelligent. But for some reason, he adored me. And as stated in the song, it has been almost precisely a year since I last saw him. He did not even attend court. I never got the opportunity to explain, apologize, or even talk to him. I can still picture the expression on his face, Dot. That final stare bothers me to this day. I looked up as the woman behind the counter said in a distorted voice that I was boarding my aircraft. I walked listlessly into the queue forming in front of the door, as did the rest of the robots. No matter what you see on TV or hear on the radio, chivalry has died. Several young males jumped in front of me to secure a better spot in line. Okay, comma. I know I am not Jennifer Aniston, but is it truly macho to force your way past a woman carrying a large briefcase and purse? What happens if you go in line ahead of her? The plane will not take off until all of its passengers have boarded. If you are traveling in coach or economy, you will not get upgraded because you boarded the plane first. They should give a special award to douchebags like that. Let us call it the DB Trophy. It could be like the Heisman Trophy for jerks, idiots, and everyone on the planet. I see it now. We will hold a ceremony on ESPN or Fox. The announcer will speak, and the award for knocking down a 40-year-old woman hauling her bags through the airport boarding queue goes to the jerk. Here. Maybe I was just cranky about spending another holiday season alone. I should not allow stuff like these worry me. It never did while I was married. Back then, all I could think about was getting home to Garrett. Of course, I traveled significantly less than 2. I only went on the road when absolutely essential. Now that I am divorced, I have no excuse to stay at home and be unhappy, so I travel more. On the other hand, perhaps my frequent travel exposes me to more douchebags. As I settled into my spot in line, I noticed one of those exceptions, one of the guys who gives us hope. A guy around 8 spaces ahead of me had gotten there because he was standing near the entrance when it opened. He drew a woman even older than myself into line ahead of him. When the young moron behind him began to complain, the gentleman turned and sneered at him. The young douchebag was so astonished that he simply shut up. I think I was more surprised than the douchebag was. I felt a strange tingle from my feet to the back of my neck. The man who stood up to the douchebags was a medium-sized man. He wasn't particularly huge, but neither was he small. His brown hair appeared to have a wonderful gloss to it. His eyes were warm and brown as well. This could not be considered love at first sight because I had seen him before. I had seen him. Hundreds do it thousands of times, both physically and in my dreams. For some inexplicable reason, it looked that the spirit of Christmas had heard my whining and answered by making my Christmas wish come true. My ex-husband, Gerald, stood up to the scumbag. Standing so close to him was unreal. On the one hand, I wanted to rush over to him and hug the snot out of him. I wanted to tell him that our year apart was ended, that we could get back together, and that both of our lives would improve. I wanted to tell him that I knew what I'd done and had learned from it. I had not only learnt from it, but I had also suffered from it, and I was willing to go to any length to ensure that it never happened again. On the other hand, I had to be smarter than that. I needed to look at this logically. I needed to examine the issue before going in blindly. He was compelled to feel angry or resentful. He might not be ready to see or communicate with me yet. Looking at him, I could tell he wasn't the same old Gerald. But damn it, I wasn't the same Audrey. He was thinner. I'm not convinced that was a good thing. He was not overweight to begin with. I believe we both dealt with the depression in different ways. I spent a lot of time lying around eating chocolate, so I may have gained 2 or 14 pounds and my buttocks has widened slightly. And my gut isn't as tight as it once was. It wasn't always that tight, but I hadn't gotten to the point where a few weeks of dieting and more exercise couldn't restore the damage. Jared's unhappiness probably caused him to skip meals because he was too sleepy or didn't feel like preparing. However, it wasn't only that he was thinner. He appeared to have a different perspective as well. He used to be so focused and energetic, but now he appeared to be in better control of himself and his environment. He seems to have matured. At the same time, he had lost something. Perhaps it was his innocence. I guess I was to blame for that. He trusted and loved me unconditionally, and I had simply been undeserving of his confidence. My heart pounded like a drum. Just being this close to him again made my thoughts race with all kinds of possibilities. It had to be the spirit of Christmas. It had been just over a year since I had seen or heard anything about him from anyone. And suddenly, he appears. That was a sign. I was certain of it. I had to be very careful how I approached him, though. My track record was impeccable. I seemed to muck up everything I touched. My life and marriage were examples of this. I knew I just had one chance at Christmas, wish or not. As the line moved and we boarded the plane, luck appeared to be on my side. The flight attendants appeared to be seating everyone based on their tickets. Gerald was in business class with me. Fortunately for me, the guy, his cronies, and the old lady were all in economy. Gerald appeared to be going alone, which offered me another advantage. Most likely, no one would sit next to him until at least one of the available seats was filled. The seats next to persons who were obese, unattractive, stinky, or just bizarre would be taken last. According to my position in line when I came on, there should still be empty seats. As soon as I got on the plane, I'd choose to sit next to Gerald rather than take an empty seat. As I began to walk down the aisle, I noticed two female flight attendants looking at Gerald, then at each other and nodding. Just as I was about to dive onto the seat next to Gerald, the 350-pound giant 3 seats ahead of me sat next to Gerald. I was crushed. I wasn't sure what to do. I sat across the aisle from the budding Buddha and stewed. I was outraged beyond belief. Why the hell would this fat be in a hole? Want to spoil my Christmas wish by sitting next to my husband? Was this guy gay or something? I couldn't believe the spirit of Christmas had set me up like that, only to dash my hopes somewhere above the clouds. The spirit of Christmas was probably laughing at me. Then things got worse. A young woman strolled down the aisle. Even I noticed her as she boarded the plane. She had long blonde hair, large giant eyes, and big everything else. Big, obviously, fake boobs. A small, high-pitched voice and a habit of laughing at things that weren't even funny if said by a man. Even the flight attendants grimaced as the witch boarded the plane. As she moved down the aisle, I noticed that the giant next to Gerald had his tongue out and was drooling. I smiled at him. He appeared embarrassed that he had been caught perving on her. "I'm surprised you aren't following her." "I said—" He simply shrugged his shoulders and looked at me sheepishly. "Seriously, I said. Her name is Tina, and she like large teddy bear-type guys." His neck snapped around in her direction so quickly that I feared his head would pop off. I've never seen a large person move that quickly. If the Lions' defensive line could move that swiftly, no NFL quarterback would be safe. He dashed to the back of the plane and dropped down in the seat next to Barbie with such speed that he appeared to be jet-propelled. I don't think his feet hit the ground more than twice in that entire distance. He'd be furious if he discovered that I knew nothing about that bimbo. I gently took the seat next to my ex-husband. He tilted his head back and closed his eyes. I don't think he recognizes me yet. Either that or he hadn't noticed me. I was confident that we'd have time to converse during our 3-hour flight. All of the chairs surrounding us had filled up, and I found myself smiling. I smiled not only because my Christmas dream had come true, but also because he couldn't get out of there with all of the seats filled. He looked up as the flight attendants delivered their customary safety procedure lecture, going over how we were expected to comport ourselves on the plane. They finally locked the door, and the jet began to taxi ahead. Gerald let out a massive gulp of air. "Do I have to hold your hand?" I asked. "Do you still feel scared about takeoffs and landings?" His head rotated to face me, and our eyes connected for a split second. I witnessed him move from realization, fury, and then resignation. "I'm all right," he said. Then he got out a magazine and started reading it. It had been a major step. He now knew I was there, sitting directly next to him. He hadn't shouted at me or asked one of the flight attendants to move seats. The massive silver beer cans with wings that we were seated on increased pace and eventually lifted their weight into the air. Even after all the flights I've taken, I'm constantly amazed that something that large can propel itself into the air. The fact that we stopped rolling and began flying is one of the most amazing things in the world to me. This plane, like all of the others I've flown on, made the transfer as smooth as possible. We gained altitude and then executed a long, sweeping bank to line ourselves with our intended course. The captain uttered a few words over the intercom that I didn't notice. The flight attendants strolled up and down the aisles, greeting passengers and answering inquiries. We hadn't even been in the air for 2 minutes, and those Fitbits were already aggravating me. It took all of my willpower not to shout at them for being so darn joyful. Gerald, on the other hand, found his magazine fascinating. In fact, he hadn't looked up from it once. Can we speak? I spoke out of the blue. His brown eyes lifted from his magazine to meet mine. They terrify my face as if searching for something. Whatever he wished to see there, I hope to God that he finds it. "What's the point?" he asked. His voice was obscured by neutrality. I had no idea how he felt about talking with me. He may have been fuming with rage, wincing in pain, or simply disinterested. I simply couldn't tell. "JR, we never had the chance to converse. I'll be there afterward. I never had the chance to apologize or explain. I didn't get the chance to say anything to you. We never received any type of closure. My psychiatrist argues that following a traumatic encounter, both parties are in a state of limbo. Until they get the opportunity to meet face-to-face and share their views or perspectives on the situation to the other involved parties." He glanced at me as if he didn't get what I was saying. His expression was one of wonder rather than anger. He didn't mean to hurt me. It was as if he didn't understand why I wanted to talk to him, or why he would want to listen. "Interesting, he remarked. Then he returned to his magazine. Gerald always had a way of frustrating me. In this scenario, he wasn't conversing with me. I had envisioned this moment thousands of times during the previous year. There were so many things I wanted to tell him. I practiced answering any and all questions I knew he'd ask. I had responses to all of them, even his responses to my inquiries. As usual, Gerald wasn't doing what I expected. He was not only not conversing with me, but he was also not refusing to speak to me. I was prepared for him to refuse to speak to me. I had a full speech or 3 ready to handle that. 2 of them included beginning the talks with explicit lies in order to draw him in. But Gerald, by refusing to speak while not actually speaking, evaded them all. He was so unlike everyone I had ever met. He was brilliant, attractive, and danced to the beat of a drummer who appeared to be only audible to him. At the same time, if he liked you, he had no issue bringing you into his world and letting you hear that drummer and jiggle a little bit to his strange rhythm right beside him. Hell, I missed that drummer when we first met. We were both in our late 20s after graduating from college. We were both in the beginning of our careers and in the middle of relationships. I first met him through a buddy of a friend. She liked him, but he had never noticed her. Guys always remark about how much they despise being stuck in the buddy zone. I believe we ladies are unaware, but sometimes males make very improper moves on us on purpose. They do this to get out of the buddy zone. A guy is in the buddy zone. It indicates he can do anything for us, but we will never screw him. We treat the males in the buddy zone as if they were girlfriends, just with tools between their legs. We can meet and completely despise other males. We may believe that such guys are completely healthy, yet they are nonetheless more likely to screw us than the guys in the friend zone. So occasionally those friend zone guys would grab your bum or your tits, knowing that they're ruining our friendship just to get out of it. To them, it's better to be in a hole hoping to get laid than to be stuck listening to the tales of every horrible date a woman has had, without the tiniest possibility of ever banging her. Anyway, Connie was in Jared's friend zone. She would come over to watch football with him despite the fact that she knew nothing about sport when in his place. She'd accidentally spill beer all over herself and have to change into one of his. She once told me that she wore one of his t-shirts with nothing underneath for a whole game and he didn't make a move. It was quite depressing for her. She knew he wasn't gay, but there she was, sitting mere inches away from him. But Gerald didn't notice. Things like that are hard on a girl's ego, so she decided to fight back with fire. She pretended she wasn't interested in him either. She even went so far as to propose other ladies he could be interested in. She wasn't naive enough to propose someone more attractive than herself or someone she felt he'd prefer, which is where I came in. She invited me over to a party she was giving and introduced me to him. It was a bad scenario because I truly wanted to help her out, but the trouble was that the moment I saw him, I knew I wanted him. At the time, I was 26 years old and worked as a secretary. I dated constantly but hadn't met anyone serious. I wasn't a prude, but I insisted that my dates spend time getting to know me before we got intimate. After we spoke and I heard Jared's side of the story, I knew he was even worse than I was. He just did not sleep with ladies with whom he did not feel a strong connection. If he can't see himself wedded to you, he just wouldn't sleep with you. We must have met each other's expectations because less than 2 hours after meeting, Jared had his tool as far as he could get it into me. My legs were so far apart, attempting to drag him in even deeper, that I expected my hips to fall out of their sockets at any moment. It felt so fantastic that I couldn't care. I obviously lost Connie as a friend, but shit. Regardless, it was entirely our fault. In a way, Connie had insulted me. She simply introduced me to Jared because she thought she was more attractive than I was. She also believed that she was constructed better than I was, and she believed that I had no chance with him. It was her loss and fault. I still giggle now, thinking about how she must have felt after introducing us at that party, only to see the two of us leave shortly after. She must have felt terrible to abandon her guests simply to accompany us back to my apartment. She waited outside for over 4 hours until he left, then ran up to my apartment and confronted me. I opened the door, assuming he'd forgotten something. I hadn't bothered to put on any clothes. I still have bite marks on my neck. She fell into tears when she saw me, calling me every type of 304 and tramp she could think of. She cried, "You're not as pretty as I am." I simply nodded my head. "Your tits are too little, and your buttocks are far too large," she yelled. I nodded again. "You are a 304. You screwed him on the first date. You didn't go on another date." All I could do was nod and agree with her. "What have you got that I don't?" she cried. "For starters, I stated that this is mine, and I have no intention of returning him to you." I slammed the door in her face, ending 5 years of friendship. But it also marked the beginning of my romance with Jared, which would eventually lead to our marriage. He was and still the love of my life. In those first few weeks with Jared, I rapidly realized what love truly meant. We spent nearly every possible second together. We spent a lot of time in bed, but we also spent time learning about each other's likes and dislikes, as well as our personality idiosyncrasies. There were many days when we went to bed together but didn't have sex. We'd simply lie there, touching each other. It intensified after we married. Jared became obsessed with making our lives together as good as they possibly be. He'd gone to great lengths to please and maintain my happiness. We saved every dime we could to purchase our home. The objective was to begin preparing for our ultimate genetically flawless nuclear children. I realized after a while that for Jared, we didn't have much money coming in from our employment beyond what we needed and what we could save each week. There existed a double standard. Jared denied himself even minor pleasures, yet he'd always indulge in everything I desired. I didn't know what he was doing until this summer. He hadn't driven a Mustang once. That manner, he claimed he could save the whole cost of the car's exorbitantly expensive insurance rates. He might also save money on gas for the powerful engine. I walked away from him, shaking my head as I remembered that only the week before, he had taken me out to dinner at a really expensive restaurant that I wanted to try, and he had purchased me 3 new outfits that I had to acknowledge I didn't really need. It was beginning to set me that this man loved me. He hadn't married me because he enjoyed screwing me. He wanted me to be with him for the rest of his life. He was going to be more than just a father figure to my children. Jared represented the missing piece of my soul. I applied and was accepted into the sales training program at work. After 6 months, I was a fully fledged salesperson. I owned and fought for accounts in everything. I did note that my sales weren't as high as some of the other guys. I assumed it was due to long-term consumer connections or other similar causes. I listened to a few of the older salespeople. Sometimes I realized that they all had ways to sweeten their deals. Some invited their customers to gatherings or barbecues. Others played golf or asked their customers to gamble. However, all of those guys received the best accounts with the highest sales numbers and bonuses. I think it was approximately 4 years ago. I've been a salesperson for roughly 3 years. Mick Fleetwood was one of my best customers. Mick was one of my first accounts, but he still only generated little transactions. He occasionally called some of the other salespeople for larger sales, despite the fact that he was technically my account. Mick was 68 years old and in horrible condition. His wife had died a few years ago, and I had attended her burial. I assumed that we had the type of relationship where I could ask him anything. So I did. I questioned him why he handed me all of his regular small-order business while deferring his large machinery sales to John McVie or possibly Lindsay Buckingham. He explained that those guys had a knack of sweetening transactions for him. It turns out that those guys were getting the raucous old sex workers. I was desperate for a bonus so that I could remain in the sales force. I felt compelled to contribute to Gerald's home-saving efforts, so I slept with Mick. I didn't consider it sexual. He was 68 years old. Even with Viagra, he could barely keep it going for approximately 10 minutes. Furthermore, no man alive could compete with Gerald in terms of sex. We were just so beautiful together. We fit so nicely together. And I adored him so much. You couldn't compare him to anything else. After a number of incentives, the additional income was quite beneficial to us. After a while, we bought our home and appeared to be doing well. Gerald had received a few promotions at work and was now earning a lot more money. We swapped in his Mustang for a newer, better Mustang. I also acquired a new automobile. We did save money, but it was more of a rainy day fund. Finally, we started talking about my quitting my work so we could start having kids. We decided I'd finish the year and then offer my notice early the next year. I was in Chicago eating dinner with one of my biggest clients. I wanted to end on a positive note. I hoped to earn the top sales award for that quarter. I had come close several times before, but neither I nor any of the company's female salespeople had ever won it. After dinner, I retired to my hotel room with the customer. I was lying there, imagining that the 60-year-old guy humping away at me was Gerald, and that we were having a baby. Come on, honey, give me the juice. Make me a mom. I explained that the old creep on me was out of breath and didn't care what I said. As long as he received some. I could have called him Gerald and he would not have blinked. That was how I made it through the sex. I simply closed my eyes and pretended it was Gerald. Of course, it never felt as nice as it did with Gerald, but the mind can do amazing things. Only the last time something told me to open my eyes. I did it, and my world came to an end. As my gaze concentrated, I observed Gerald standing in the open doorway among several of my colleagues and my supervisor. He had tears rolling down his face. I attempted to push Harvey off of me. He was partially deaf and wasn't aware of what was happening. "No," I yelled. "Goodbye." Audrey mentioned Gerald. I adored you even when he turned and went away. I was dragging myself out from under Harvey's weight. The expressions of the remaining males in the room as I attempted to dress and follow Gerald were all very different. My employer was furious. He stood there, glowing a deeper crimson like an old steam furnace. He was running over the facts in his head, almost as if he was building up steam before blowing. The tittering expressions on my colleagues' faces varied as well. I heard everything from, I realized there was a reason why my body was outselling me. After all, we all have different ways of completing a deal. I heard something just before leaving the room to go to the bathroom. Shit, I should have screwed her personally. Harvey was beaming and high-fiving the boys. His newfound calmness far surpassed any potential harm to his marriage. As I finished cleaning myself up and putting my clothing in a suitcase, I noticed that all of the guys had left, except for my employer, Darren. My sorrow and sadness had finally subsided. It poured out in lengthy, melancholy wails and cries. I couldn't stop crying no matter what I tried. Darren was trying to explain how they'd gotten there. There had been no spying on me. There had not been an investigation. Darren realized that I had previously received the top salesperson award for the quarter. He called to inform me, and he had forgotten that I was on the road when he told Gerald about the award. Gerald had admitted that it would probably be my last trip because we were about to conceive a family. Both Darren and Gerald agreed that surprise me with a cake and a small ceremony would be a wonderful idea. Only they were astonished. He suggested that I wait for Gerald to recover from his shock before attempting to communicate with him. Darren had married and divorced 3 times. Wife number 4 seemed like the one to stay. He'd been through and seen everything. He'd already been through this once. He tried to explain to me how Gerald was feeling or something like, because everyone was different. He said that tomorrow would be a good time to try to talk to Gerald. He advised me to clarify my tale and be prepared to be humiliated and take a lot of shit. He told me it would certainly take some time, but Gerald and I adored each other. So we believed that if we battled hard enough, we could succeed. He also informed me that I was fired as soon as I finished packing. I checked out and headed to the airport. My flight was not scheduled to leave until the following afternoon. I'd missed the last flight of the day by less than a half hour. Unfortunately, Gerald had been on it. When I returned to the motel, Harvey was sitting and drinking with the men. I did not go over to them. I stayed in my room crying and attempting to call Gerald. He did not answer or return any of my calls. Despite my efforts to avoid the males, they attempted to enter my room. I was no longer considered a co-worker in their eyes. I was just a 304. There were no longer any workplace regulations that prevented them from hitting on me. When I flew out the next day, I had spent the entire night planning my showdown with Gerald. I was ready to get down on one knee and kiss his buttocks or whatever he wanted me to do. I anticipated him to have changed the locks and the garage code. I tried to enter the garage first. My remote functioned on the first try. I realized then that as angry as he was, it wasn't a deal-breaker. If he still gave me access to the garage where his prized Mustang was kept for the winter. My anguish intensified as the garage door opened. Gerald's Mustang was not only missing in the middle of winter, with snow on the ground, which was unprecedented. My car was in the garage. Many of you will not grasp what that means. Gerald's automobile had never seen snow or rain. Gerald only drove that car during the summer, on completely dry days. The car's undercarriage, as well as the rest of it, were still showroom new. The car had never gone through a car wash. He washed the automobile every third day throughout the summer, no matter what. It slept all winter in a heated garage, and although being covered, he bathed it to keep dust off it. There was only one meaning to the message he had given me. Gerald was gone, and he was not coming back. I broke down bawling in the garage again. As I sat there crying, a UPS truck drew up in front of the home, and the driver stepped out and handed me a large package. It wasn't particularly heavy. I signed for the item, and the driver wished me a Merry Christmas before leaving. I knew what was inside the package. This was one of Gerald's Christmas presents. I purchased him a suede and leather jacket with Mustang emblems on it so he could remember the silly car, even though he couldn't drive it. I spotted a large amount of rubbish piled up in front of the house. I ignored it as I walked to the door and tried my key. It still functioned, of course. I wasn't sure what to anticipate when I walked into the house. I guess I assumed Gerald would go insane and destroy all of our possessions and wreck the house. I knew things could be replaced, so I was ready. But Gerald had transformed the house in ways I hadn't anticipated. There was nothing out of place, which is unusual for me when traveling. This time, the house was as tidy as a pin. As I strolled through each area, I noticed that he had not taken much, if anything at all. He had lost all of his clothes and the majority of his tools. He'd taken every image of himself, as well as every picture of the two of us, and he'd just cut himself out and replaced it in the frames. If I had planned to burn off some nervous energy by cleaning while waiting for him to call, I was disappointed because there was nothing to do. It took me a bit to realize what Gerald had done. He completely ruined our home without even intending to cause any damage. He transformed our home into just another house by removing all of the love from it. As I glanced around that house, instead of seeing all of the amazing memories we made there, as well as all of the hopes and dreams we still had about what we wanted to do there, I saw simply a large, empty box to keep all of my junk in. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the phone rang. It was Mary, our next-door neighbor. She stated she saw lights in the house and assumed I was home. I had known Mary for years. We first met her and her husband on the day we moved in. I decided I'd tell her Gerald had left me. Perhaps she'd come over to make me coffee and console me. She had called to cancel my invitation to the Christmas Eve party they were hosting this Saturday. She called me some harsh things and told me that I deserved whatever happened to me. Obviously, she had spoken with Gerald. Surprisingly, he had requested her to keep an eye out for me and informed her that I would need a companion. I fell asleep on the couch after consuming much too much alcohol. I woke up the next morning with a severe hangover. I hadn't seen or heard from Gerald in more than 36 hours, and I was going insane. I'm wondering why he didn't call to curse and call me names. Didn't he want to yell at me or ask why? Later in the evening, the doorbell rang. I leapt up from the couch and dashed to the door. As I opened it, I observed a bored-looking female on the porch. She was chewing gum and looking over a list. She read my name from the list. When I confirmed my identity, the little witch wished me Merry Christmas. You have been served. She gave me a huge folder of documents and sneered at me. She went away, still popping her gum as if nothing else mattered. I opened the folder. Never in my wildest fantasies did I expect that. Especially not so rapidly. These were divorce papers. Gerald asked for a no-fault divorce. He wanted to split everything 50-50ths. He had already plundered half of our checking and savings accounts. He was liquidating our investments and would send me a check shortly. He had also removed himself from my 401k plan and provided me the paperwork so that he could remove me from his dot. He graciously filed a swift claim for our house and was delivering it to me. He stored the automobile in his Jeep. I kept the automobile, if I signed off on it. The divorce would be finalized in 60 days. There was no way I was going to give him up. I planned to hire a lawyer and demand my day in court. I wanted to fight for my marriage with my last breath. I would not let Gerald leave my life unless I had done everything in my power to keep him there. It ultimately took 75 days rather than 60. You expect to hear that? I fought for and obtained a meeting with him, or counseling, correct? None of that occurred. Even my lawyer recognized that Gerald had gone well beyond fair. He should have forced me sell the house and divided the profits with him. I believe that giving me the house was Gerald's method of exacerbating my suffering by pushing me to recall all of our life plans. I sat alone in that house, and it was torment. Everything I saw made me think of what I had lost. Gerald is one of those persons whose absence is felt by everyone he knows. So my neighbors didn't spend any time in telling me how they felt. Less than a week after Gerald left, I began to feel like a small island in the middle of a large lake. I felt completely lonely among folks I once thought were my friends. There was also the fact that without him, I couldn't truly afford our mortgage, and refinancing it would have been a disaster. So I ended up selling it nonetheless, for a far lower price than it was worth. I took another job and began attempting to work my way back up the food chain. The trouble is that finding motivation is really difficult when you simply don't care. For the first few months, the new job also required sales experience. I didn't strive very hard, thus I made very little money. I saw that I was spending my savings at an alarming rate. The cost of my therapy appointments was also affecting my bottom line. My new job did not offer employee pensions, so I needed to cease depleting my savings account. The therapy was ineffective. I already knew where I had gone wrong. I already knew what I had lost. I had genuinely lost a part of me. I had given away a part of my soul, and only by regaining it can I ever be whole again. So now it's a year later. I'm larger, less attractive, and depressed. I made a wish, and it seems to be coming true, but I guess I'll have to work for it a little. I don't mind. All I wanted was a chance. Gerald is seated next to me. He's like a life preserver in the middle of a stormy sea, and I'm a drowning lady. There is no way I'm letting him get away again. While we were away, I did everything I could to keep track of Gerald. I formed friendships and rheostat connections with individuals solely to find out how he was doing. Some of it needed me to denigrate myself and consume a lot of garbage. Remember that? Which Connie. She was the dumb one who gave me Gerald in the first place. Connie contacted about a week after Gerald had left me. She couldn't wait to rub it in. I had to listen to her, and she basically called me a piece of trash. "I warned him about you from the start," she croaked. "You weren't the proper fit for him. You had dropped your drawers within minutes of meeting him. Remember, around 20 minutes into the chat. I finally received what I had been hoping for. He's really not doing well. She said you didn't hear him well. I've tried everything I could think of to get him to leave his flat. I've even tried to go over there and see him, but he refuses to see anyone because of my patience and her big tongue." I had all the knowledge I needed. I knew Gerald had moved into an apartment. I also knew he wasn't looking to date anyone, and that he was having as much trouble getting over me as I was with him. I got other news from other sources, but Connie was always the one I could rely on when I really needed to know anything. She relished telling me she knew more about my spouse than I did. She enjoyed boasting about the fact that I wasn't likely to end up with him. Unfortunately, after a while, all of my information on Gerald simply dried up. Nobody seems to know anything about him. Even Connie admitted that she had no idea what was going on in his life. I would have paid to know even the least detail about how he was or what he was doing. All of a sudden he appears, and other from seeming a little leaner and more serious, he looks great. Gerald seemed to have fared better than I had during our time apart. Perhaps his conscience is clear. While I hold responsibility for the end of our marriage, I gazed across at my ex-husband as the jet proceeded to slice through the air, reducing the distance between us and our destination by miles every second. It just felt like, as I observed him from the corner of my eye, our time was slipping away, and with it, any hope I had of regaining his attention. "How do you sleep?" I asked him out of the blue. "What?" he asked. I thought I saw the beginning of a smile on his lips. "Audrey, you always had a penchant for asking me the most bizarre questions," he remarked. "That was one of my favorite things about you." And I suppose one of the things I missed the most. I was having difficulty concentrating when he stated it. Gerald certainly had no idea how his remarks had me in a near swoon. I started to sense the power of the Christmas spirit acting on my behalf again. I might just pull this off. He turned in his seat and glanced at me. His smile just brightened my entire existence. Everything was going great until one of those tiny plastic flight attendants appeared. She inquired if he wanted something to drink. Okay, I know you think I am exaggerating, but I am not. What was preventing the tool from being used? Why am I thinking that? Let me explain the situation. Gerald and I both fly business class. We both receive the same advantages and privileges. She walks up and bends across me, giving him a clear view of her cleavage to see if he wants a drink. Shouldn't the proper protocol be to ask both of us if we wanted a drink? Was it essential to lean over me and rub her titties in his face? The witch also did this before they had the drink cart ready to go around. She noticed that Gerald and I were talking. She was unaware that we already had a pass together. She noticed him turn around in his seat and smile at me. She just decided to shit in my cornflakes right there. Fortunately, it did not work. Gerald simply smiled at her and said he'd wait till the cart came around to see what they had. She explained that she approached him early to see if he wanted anything special or off the menu. I asked her if everyone had that opportunity, and she simply smiled and left without responding. So, was I overreacting? "I suppose I never expected to see you again," he remarked, shifting the subject, and spoke to me as if we hadn't been stopped. But I didn't anticipate anything to happen. It was like being kicked in the teeth. I suppose that was partly my fault. You know, when I met you, I assumed that my life was set. I never dreamed you and I would not be together forever. I never considered that either. I said. I noticed a flicker of wrath on his face, which he carefully concealed. That was another thing about Gerald. I've never seen him lose his temper. Not once throughout the entire time we were together. So even that flash of negative feeling revealed a lot about what he was going through to get over me. Gerald, "I love you so much. It hurts me to not be with you." I said, "I feel like a part of my soul has vanished. I needed to sell the house. I couldn't be there. The ghosts of us kept telling me that we were broken. None of our neighbors would speak with me. I became a pariah. I tried therapy. It did not help. Nothing helped. Gerald, it was like if I died and no one informed me. I was just strolling around, going through the motions of existence, not understanding I wasn't alive anymore." As I stated this, a single tear ran down my cheek. I've been working so hard to hold myself together. I thought I was past it, but finally being able to talk about it with someone who actually cared brought all of those old emotions back to the surface. Gerald gave me a handkerchief. Damn him. It wasn't a napkin, damp wipe, or anything like that. It was a very good, genuine handkerchief. Where the hell does he acquire stuff like that these days? "Okay," he replied. "I understand your point of view. We have a chance meeting. We have not spoken since it happened. So you see it as an opportunity. For what? Closure." His eyes swept my face, and I felt as if every feeling I'd suppressed, as well as all of my goals and dreams, were now exposed to him. I looked down and was rewarded. The floor of the airliner was carpeted. That was good, because if you instructed me to crawl down on my knees and beg or suck his tool, I would. So Okay, Audrey, we're having this conversation. You get to keep the closure. Your therapist has told you that you need it. What is in it for me? This was odd. Gerald has never done something for his own good before. I was starting to realize what I had done to him. The changes in him were more deeper and more subtle than I had anticipated. What do you want, Gerald? I asked quietly. I'm hoping against hope that he'll tell me he wants me back. Do you understand what you did to me? He sneered as he posed the inquiry. I could tell I triggered memories and emotions he didn't want to revisit. He buried them so he wouldn't have to deal with them as we moved forward. We were going to have to open that box and look at some very disgusting items. I believe I expected some wrath and bitterness, but I was prepared to confront them if he was. His shouting was so loud that both flight attendants turned to look at us. I could see the concern on their faces as they gazed at him. The glances they gave me were far from caring. He spat out, "You were my entire world. Do you have any idea how long I searched for you? Have you any clue how special you were to me? Before you, every woman I dated resembled Connie. They only worried about how they appeared. They only cared about one thing. A guy could be represented by the sum of 3 variables in an equation. It was like romantic algebra. The first consideration is the guy's appearance. The second aspect is how much money he earns or has. The third question is, how huge is toothless? You add those 3 up to get a score. If a guy is below average in one area but above average in the other 2, he can still compete. My mouth dropped wide, not because I was astonished, but because he condensed it so succinctly. You made it sound so simple and mercenary, yet it was terribly accurate. Don't you think it's insulting to base a man's worth or desirability as a mate on only 3 variables? He asked. Even the males who attempt to screw every woman they meet have higher expectations for the women they plan to marry. That's one of the reasons I never tried to screw every lady I came across. I knew I couldn't be with someone like Connie. She's attractive and all that. But on a deeper level, we simply didn't click. So, why would I waste my time with her? When I met you, things were different. I'm not saying you weren't pretty. You were. However, you possessed certain qualities that Connie lacked. I was drawn to you physically, but within a few minutes of meeting you, my intellect and heart told me you were the right person. I just knew it. Hearing this from him now made me want to open the plane's door and scream, "Happy hours!" Of course, if I did that, the plane would depressurize and crash into the earth, killing all the passengers, with Gerald and me among them. The only item that would most likely survive intact are the airbags that inflate the flight attendant's boobs. Audrey, Connie scolded me for deciding that you were the person I wanted to be with. She promised me for months that you would do something. Like what? You did. I never believed her. That is one of the reasons why she and I are no longer friends. So, after what transpired between us, she attempted to help me get over it, but she wasn't my buddy. All she did was push it in my face that she had warned me about you. And she kept attempting to persuade me that the solution to my difficulties was to hook up with her. A buddy does not try to force you to undertake anything you aren't ready for. So Connie and I are no longer friends. Audrey. I was depressed and battered down. For a long time, I did not go out at all. It was more than a month before I returned to work. I was simply devastated. Think about it. The lady I loved, with whom I thought I shared my heart and soul, was out and banging other men. I walked in on you, screwing a man old enough to be your grandfather. I closed my eyes and attempted to look away from him. He would not let me. He leaned out and softly gripped my face before pulling me back. So I was facing both him and Audrey. It stung even more to learn that you enjoyed it more than you did with me. He said. Both of our minds and emotions were laid bare. I was plainly crying, and Gerald's eyes were also wet. Would either of you prefer a dry flight attendant? Barbie started before we both cut her off. No, we both shouted at the same time. Our response was significantly tougher than we intended to be. Everyone in our area noticed and looked at us. We'll be landing in about an hour, the flight attendant announced as she moved her trolley to the next group of passengers. In a calmer yet angry tone, I chatted with Gerald again. What the hell makes you think I enjoyed it more with him? I asked Gerald. You, asshole! There has never been anyone better than you. There was never anyone as good. Audrey, what dumb reasoning are you basing this garbage on? He asked quietly. Even after all this time, I could tell he was struggling with this. He was hurting as much, if not more, than I was. That was what you stated, Dot. You begged him to put his juice in you and make you a mother. You wanted that old fat creep to make you pregnant, not me. Jared, have you lost your mind? I asked him. I stared at him, thinking he was joking or being facetious, but there was no sign of duplicity in those gorgeous brown eyes. Jared truly believed what he heard that day. Jared, whenever I was with those guys, we never talked about love or sex. You gave me all I needed in terms of love and sex. When I was with him, the only way I could get through it was to close my eyes and think it was you, on top of me, so I pretended that it was you that day. It was the only way to get a response from me if I did not. I just laid there dry as a bone. It would be like they were tampering with a blow-up doll. Having sex with you was far more than a physical act. They could never come close to that Dot. Jared, S expression changed again. I'm not sure why I expected him to be happy after hearing that, but I did. However, his reaction was far from joyful. It felt like an explosion of pain. Maybe Jared's emotions were like a collection of substances stored on shelves in his head. My responses to his questions had released some of those feelings, which should never have been mixed. So why the heck did you do it? He yelled. Jared's yell boomed throughout the plane, like if a bomb had gone off. Not only the flight attendants, but two men on different ends of the plane rose up and peered at us. I suppose we knew who the air marshals were after that. The flight attendants and one of the males approached us. "Sir," said the man, "is there an issue here? Should we arrange for you to exchange seats?" "It's my fault," I admitted. The man glanced at me skeptically. "We only need some privacy. We'll keep it down." The man stared at us suspiciously. "He's my ex-husband." I said, "We haven't communicated since the divorce began. Perhaps if we'd had the opportunity to discuss, things might be different now." I believe he didn't expect some of my responses to his queries. I did something terrible to him. When we get off this plane, we might never see each other again. We will be very quiet. He shook his head but returned to his seat. "Jared, this was never about me being upset with you. You were always enough for me. I am completely in love with you. We had no issues between us. The problem was mine. You always treated me as if I were gold. Even when we didn't have any money, you'd spend all of our savings on something I didn't need, while you went without. I simply needed to strive to contribute more to our finances. I wanted to help. I realized it was dumb. I knew it was wrong. However, the money was quite beneficial to us. It relieved some of our financial stress and allowed us to move into our new home far sooner than we would have otherwise. It cost us nothing, and we got back." Jared motioned for me to stop. He turned away from me and began to look at something on his iPhone. "Jared," I whispered quietly, rubbing his shoulder. He pulled away from me again. "Audrey, could you kindly leave me alone for a while?" he asked. "I feel like I need to process this." After a few minutes, I noticed Jared bring out a pad and begin writing something. I glanced directly ahead. A few minutes later, the flight attendant walked by. I grabbed her arm before she moved too far away from me. She glanced at me as if I had done something wrong by touching her. "Can I get my drink now?" I asked politely as I could. "I'm sorry," she said, "but the witch. If you don't get me a drink, you'll wish you did." I spoke as coldly as I could. She nodded and returned a few minutes later with several of those small drink bottles. I took 3 vodka bottles. "You should probably put them in a glass," she suggested, "and we'll be landing shortly." I nodded and accepted the drink she offered me. I sat back and glanced around. The majority of the passengers in my area, who weren't staring out the window or talking to one another, were staring at me. I just wanted to get up and yell as loudly as I could. I didn't, for 2 reasons. First, because I knew I'd get arrested. The air marshals and flight attendants were already tired of me, and if I pushed them any further, my bum would be grass. Second, Stankstar used the boo-hoo thing last year and is unlikely to do it again. And if he did, Michael Selby would simply edit it out. Jared was scribbling away on the pad. It appeared as if the man was attempting to write War and Peace in 10 minutes on a legal pad. He wouldn't even look at me, and I had so much to tell him. Just as the plane began to descend, he stood up and approached a flight attendant. He carried his blazer and briefcase with him. "Bathroom." He slung it over his shoulder as he departed. I saw him have a talk with the flight attendant and the air marshal before moving further back in the plane. A few moments later, Airplane Barbie returned and began ordering everyone to replace their tray tables and anything else that wasn't confined. We were about to land. I grabbed her shoulder again and inquired about Gerald. She stated that he was still in the lavatory, but not to worry. He'd be fine if you remained there for the landing. I wasn't afraid about him falling into the little toilet, as she assumed. I was concerned about our unfinished chat. At this point, my Christmas desire had not been granted. There were so many things we needed to tell one other. Where were we? Will we get back together? Are we going to try to become friends? God, I needed that man back in my life. It was time to pick up the pieces and go forward with our lives. I was still dealing with the grief and hurt he had been carrying around with him. I guess I always knew I loved Gerald, but hearing what he said and discovering the true depth of his love for me was so unexpected. I never imagined that a man could love any woman so deeply, let alone me. I could not quit thinking about it. He genuinely adored me. Audrey, just being herself. My betrayal had devastated him considerably more than I had anticipated. All this time, I thought I was the one who was in pain. Maybe getting back together would be beneficial for both of us. The Christmas spirit was evident in the assistance provided to two individuals, not one. The plane landed exactly on time. I peered past Gerald's window seat, seeing the ground rise as we arrived in the parking lot after flying over it. I thought I seen Gerald's Mustang GT parked beside me. He liked nothing more than his automobile. As the plane came to a stop, the people, who had all been in a hurry to board, renewed their impatience and scurried to exit. Gerald still hadn't returned from the bathroom, and I had a lot to say to him. Perhaps we could continue our conversation over dinner? I remained in my seat while the passengers disembarked. When the last passenger had exited the plane, the flight attendant came over to me. "You must leave the plane right now, ma'am," she said. I couldn't believe the witch called me ma'am. She acted as if I were an old lady or slow. I said, "I'm waiting for my friend to leave the bathroom." She sat down next to me and gave me a concerned look. God damn it. She seemed to care deeply. He never went to the restroom, she said. There was no animosity or venom in her tone. She truly tried to be pleasant. "He asked us to let him go and sit in the back," she said. I suppose the things you two discussed were really unpleasant for him. He was having difficulty not sobbing. He requested to seat right by the back entrance. That is why he took everything with him. We would never have let him take his briefcase and stuff into the bathroom. He was the first person off the plane. I was crushed. I started crying and I couldn't stop myself. The flight attendant, whom I had called a variety of names throughout the ride, hugged and caressed my back. She let me to cry all over her uniform. She sat with me as I told her the entire tale of my relationship with Gerald, including how I cheated on him. She listened to me tell about how he found out and left me, and how, even after a year apart, I couldn't face life without him. It was hilarious how a woman I thought disliked me turned out to be my best friend when I needed her the most. I couldn't recall any of the stranger kindness statements, but I was confident they all applied. When I had pulled myself together, she smiled at me and reminded me that there was always tomorrow. He never indicated he didn't want to see me again. At least we were conversing now. I also knew he was still working in the same location, so I could find him. I recognized then that the things we needed to hash out were well beyond what we could accomplish in a single conversation. But I hoped that one day we'd be able to sort things out. As I rose up to depart, she smiled again and handed me the envelope she was holding. "He told me to give you this," she explained. She handed me a note. It came in an envelope with the airline's emblem on it. I glanced at it with caution. I turned it over in my hands, as if seeing it from a fresh perspective would change anything. "Hey," she said as I exited the plane. "Merry Christmas and good luck. Maybe there will be good news, You understand how the enchantment of Christmas works." I smiled at her and nodded my head. As I walked leisurely through the airport, I reflected on the enchantment of Christmas. I spotted one of those computerized signs that resemble scoreboards. They provide you with comprehensive information regarding your flight. This one informed me that my bags had just arrived at baggage claim for my flight. Apparently, the airplane was on time, but the luggage was late getting off the plane. I looked at my watch. It had only been 7 minutes since the plane arrived. If I hurried, I could catch Gerald at the luggage claim. I examined a map of the airport. I quote D, flown in and out of this airport numerous times, so I knew where I needed to go. I checked the map to determine which baggage claim place I needed to go to. I took off jogging as fast as my rather flabby legs could take me. An elderly man abruptly halted in front of me. He had gone to seek for something in his suitcase. I leaped over the shocked man and landed roughly on my right foot. It hurt like hell, but I persevered. The enchantment of Christmas may have been active. Something was aiding me as I turned the final corner, barely slightly out of breath. I paused and examined the big area. Just as my gaze approached the exit, I noticed him. I saw him as clearly as day. I could clearly see the despair on his face. He took one suitcase off the luggage carousel and turned towards the exit. Just as I took a deep breath, I shouted his name. I noticed his expression transform from sorrowful to happy in that second. His eyes were fixed on the doorway. He dropped the suitcase and spread his arms. They were the same arms that I had so desperately missed wrapping around me, embracing my body in his loving embrace. I realized in that moment that those arms were no longer mine and would never be again. She was younger than both of us. She was probably 26 or 27 at most. She had long, dark hair and creamy Irish complexion with only a few freckles. Her long, slim arms and thin, curvy legs indicated that she had a very good figure. Her boobs were enormous, but I was certain this was due to her condition. She was quite lovely, yet she seemed unconcerned about such things. All of the hair was loosely tied to one side with a scrunchie. She was also very pregnant. She walked into Jared's arms as if she belonged there. She acted as if Gerald were hers. He hugged her to himself as if his life depended on it, then carefully pulled her off the ground. She leaned her lovely chin up and their mouths became one. He kissed her softly but passionately. She did what women in movies did back in the 1940s. She kissed him back. One of her legs had folded up. I used the breath I'd drawn in to cry his name, which came out harmlessly. Instead of calling his name, it became a despondent whimper. I fell back against the wall, preferring to wait until they had gone to get my bags. She shaped herself into his side as they walked out the door. I despised that tiny witch with a ferocity that would make the sun appear like a candle. You know how you can't park on the curb at airports? Perhaps it was because the little one was pregnant. But they allowed her. She tossed Gerald the keys to his Mustang GT, and I observed them drive away a few moments later, after stowing his luggage in the car's little trunk. I saw the Mustang GT's dual 3-bar lights fade in the distance, and with him, all possibility of my Christmas desire being granted. The lump in my throat was so large that I was having difficulty breathing. My eyes were damp from tears that had yet to fall, and I knew this was going to be a big one. I tried to remain composed since I didn't want to break down in the airport and start crying in front of a group of strangers who would only talk about my sorrow. I saw them gathering around their dinner tables with their families, talking about the strange old woman who sat in the airport bawling her eyes out for no reason. As I shuffled into the baggage claim area, the carousel was still operating. There were only 2 suitcases left on it. One of these was mine. My ankle was beginning to pain badly. I came to the carousel just as my bag passed by. I grabbed it and almost avoided collapsing on the floor. I heard a laugh from someplace, so I knew my athletic effort had amused someone. My ankle hurts significantly more. The bags went around in a large circle, the majority of which was outside the room, so I had to stand there and wait for the bag to complete the circuit again. When it returned, I grabbed it and exited through the door to the parking lot. I asked the bag check guy on the curb when the next shuttle would arrive. He informed me that I had just missed one and would have to wait around 20 minutes for the next one. I wasn't sure if I could hold it together for that long, so I opted to walk all the way to the parking lot. "Merry Christmas, ma'am," he exclaimed happily. His voice sounded similar to the one I heard as I landed on my rear and reached for my bag of humbugs. I responded, prompting him to laugh again. By the time I got to my car, my ankle was hurting. I threw my stuff into the back seat and got in. I started the engine and put on the heat and defroster. Sitting in the darkness of the car while it warmed up, I finally let go of all the emotions I had been keeping in. I sobbed long and hard. I sobbed not only because the Christmas spirit had deceived to me, but also because I had actually lost the one man I had ever loved. My despair gave way to wrath. I eventually became irritated by the Christmas mood. I was outraged at Gerald and that pregnant little cow who had rubbed herself all over him in public. All of this Christmas nonsense was for the birds. It never turned out this way in any of those films. Yeah, I bet it's a wonderful life. I washed my face and prepared to drive home before shifting into gear. I noticed the envelope from Gerald on the seat beside me. I grabbed it up and opened it 2 pages back, facing Gerald's unique Scribble. Gerald, as always, got straight to the point. There was no opening salutation. He just announced my name, making it clear who he was speaking with, and then started into his points. Audrey, I apologize for doing this to you, but after our talk, I became simply too emotional to continue. In reality, we never got to conclude the talk. But you told me too much that took time and space for me to digest. The first thing you should realize is that walking away from you was the most difficult thing I've ever done. I had no choice, however, because what you did had shattered me. I had no idea what I had done to cause you to cease loving me, but I knew you had made a huge mistake by going that far. When we parted ways, I spent weeks in a state of misery and despair, wondering why, among other things, you had never bothered to tell me. The regions where I was so inadequate that you had to seek solace in the embraces of a man your grandfather's age. I gave it my best shot. I wasn't able to identify my problem. You always appeared to be pleased when we were together, and whenever we made love, you seemed to be satisfied. I began to wonder if you were simply being polite to me or didn't want to upset my feelings. So you looked for what you needed on the side for quite some time. I never considered trying to find someone else. I quote V always stated that my prerequisites for a mate were both stringent and unusual. Look how long it took me to discover you. I always said it was like looking through a haystack for a golden needle. I never imagined I'd find that again. I'm looking for a specific type of women. I am looking for a woman that looks at me with her heart rather than her eyes. I was certain that I would spend the rest of my life alone. I was constantly reminded of what I previously had and had lost. Imagine my amazement when I met Karen. The reaction between us was extremely similar to when I first met you. Of course, given what had occurred to us, I was more cautious around her. But the basic truth is that I did not want to spend the rest of my life alone. I'm the type of man who is only truly happy when he has someone to love. As much as I attempted to suppress my feelings for Karen, they simply continued to develop. Within a few weeks, we both realized we were meant to be together. Audrey. Karen is not a substitute for you. She's just another chapter in the story of my life. Her chapter will hopefully go on longer than yours did. However, it will be neither better nor worse, just different. Speaking with you tonight brought back many good memories. I am confident that if we hadn't split ways, we would have grown old together and accomplished all of our dreams. I would have died a very happy man. However, it wasn't meant to be for a long time. I suppose I'd forced myself not to think about our time together or how or why it had ended. I never considered that it might not be my fault. Speaking with you today also irritated me since I had forgotten what was before we parted ways. The most significant thing in my life. For nothing, Audrey. Unless you were lying to me today, you had no motive to do what you did. Remember when we were together and chatted to several couples who had been married for longer than us? They all struggled at first, much like we did in our latter years. They always reflected fondly on the times they went without. They usually like reminiscing about moments when it was just the two of them against the world, as you mentioned. What you did gained us our house in a shorter amount of time, but it also killed our marriage. Thinking back, I'd rather have fought for a few more years and stayed with than have you do what you did and lose you. To be completely honest, the information you gave me today lifted a great burden off of my shoulders. I don't have to worry about disappointing Corinne in the same manner that I believed I had disappointed you. I'm also relieved because, Audrey, you could not have loved me as much as I did you. I would have felt sick the entire time we were together if I had been with anyone else. It clearly did not affect you in that manner, as I now know that the old bastard I caught you with was not the first or only one. In conclusion, I'd want to start by answering your original inquiry on the plane. You asked how I sleep. You mentioned to me that you'd been having difficulties sleeping since we parted. Well, Audrey, So have I quote, V had difficulty sleeping for over a year? Initially, it was because I missed you so much. Then it was because I was terrified to fail. Corinne, the way I thought I had failed you. Lately, it's because sleeping with a very affectionate, pregnant woman is unpleasant. She is continuously moving, attempting to find a comfortable posture despite the weight of her stomach tugging her to the side. At the same time, if I step away from her, she follows me and wraps herself around my arms, no matter how uncomfortable I feel. Aside from that, and with the new information you've given me today, I'm confident I'll sleep well from now on, regardless of how uncomfortable I am. I'll be sleeping with a woman who adores me and values our lives, not by how much money we have, but by the pleasant times we have together and how we treat each other. Audrey, I am not bitter. And if you require closure or forgiveness, it is granted. I sincerely hope you can go on with your life in the same way that I have. Talking to you relieved me of a lot of guilt about our breakup, because I now recognize it wasn't my fault. I've also understood that everything is in the past and doesn't matter anymore. Audrey, I wish you a Merry Christmas. He had not even bothered to sign it. I read the note again, folded it back into the envelope, and drove home safely. I pondered about his remarks the entire way there. How could I have allowed someone who loved me so much leave? Why was I upset with him? Gerald had done everything he could for me during our time together. It was my fault that we divorced. Nobody else's. I had no reason to be upset with his new wife. She was astute enough to grasp him and appreciate him when I nearly tossed him away. I pulled into the parking lot outside my lousy little townhouse. I got to my door and opened it. Another bad night in front of the awful TV with my perverted cat awaited me. Merry effing Christmas. I hope I'm not out of tuna. Right after I walked into the living room, I wondered where my cat was. Maybe, as in, It's a Wonderful Life. The point was for me to appreciate what I have more and reflect on what I have lost. Perhaps after what I had done, there were no more Christmas wishes or Christmas magic for me. My phone rang, so I answered it. I paid a youngster from down the street to watch and feed my cat while I was away. The youngster was sobbing as he told me how, as he opened the door, the cat bolted out of the townhouse and into the street where he was swiftly flattened by a passing truck. The truck didn't even slow down. I sat at my kitchen table and made myself a really strong drink. I began to truly consider all of the facts about holiday suicides. Here's the next story. My name is Kevin Starkman. I'm 42, and my wife, Tammy, recently turned 40. We've been married for 20 years and have a 19-year-old daughter, Robin, who's just started her first year of college. Our marriage, like many long-term ones, had hit a rough patch. The spark had slowly dimmed over the past few years. Tammy had grown more distant, her interest in our relationship dwindling. Our intimacy had become infrequent, more a ritual than an expression of closeness. I tried not to dwell on it, attributing it to the changes that come with age and becoming empty nesters. But deep down, I knew something was off. It was Robin who stumbled upon the first piece of evidence that shattered the illusion. She was home for winter break and needed a computer for some work. Mine was occupied, so I told her to grab the spare one in our closet. It hadn't been used since Tammy upgraded months ago. Not half an hour later, Robin stormed into my office, a mix of confusion and disgust on her face. "Dad, what kind of stuff are you into?" she demanded. I stared at her, bewildered. "What are you talking about?" She put the laptop down in front of me, open to a folder filled with explicit videos and articles. "All of this? And what's with the weird articles about submission?" My stomach dropped. "This isn't mine," I said, struggling to process what I was seeing. "This was your mother's old laptop." Robin crossed her arms, her eyes filled with disbelief. "Are you serious?" I nodded. Together we clicked through more files. What we found made my skin crawl. It wasn't just videos, it was articles and guides on how to manipulate a partner into submission. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what this all meant. We only had an hour before Tammy was due home, so we carefully put everything back as we found it. I asked Robin not to mention anything to her mother. She agreed, but insisted I keep her updated. Once Robin left for college, I began my own investigation. I had to know what was going on. A week later, while Tammy was out, I searched her new computer using a password I'd once seen her hide. I found more of the same, Explicit videos, articles, and conversations with someone called Mistress B, who styled herself as a submissive advisor. Their emails laid everything bare. Tammy had been seeking advice on making me a submissive husband. My heart pounded as I read. She described me as accommodating, rarely arguing, and easily giving in. Mistress B told her I'd be easy to manipulate and, if I resisted, to use threats of divorce. The reality hit me like a sledgehammer. Tammy was serious about this. I needed advice, so I made an appointment with Jackie Stone, one of the best divorce lawyers in the city. Jackie listened carefully as I explained everything. She reviewed our financials and gave me some good news. If Tammy tried to push for divorce, things wouldn't go as she expected. Our assets, including her business valued at nearly $1 million, would be split equally, and her income meant she'd receive no maintenance from me. Jackie advised me to play it smart and gather more evidence. Robin was horrified when I told her the full extent of her mother's plans. "Play along, Dad," she urged. "Let her think she's winning so you can see what she's really up to." I agreed, reluctantly. I continued to monitor Tammy's secret communications. Over the next few weeks, she followed Mistress B's advice to the letter, cutting off intimacy, increasing demands, criticizing my efforts around the house. I played the part, acting like a dutiful, subdued husband, while my resentment and anger simmered beneath the surface. I read every email she sent, waiting for the final betrayal. It came soon enough. Tammy informed Mistress B that she had found a bull, a term that made me sick to my stomach. He was a supplier for her business. Mistress B encouraged her to sample him before revealing the new arrangement to me. Within days, Tammy confirmed she'd done exactly that. The man's name was Stephen Rose, and their emails left no doubt about their relationship. I had the evidence I needed. When Tammy announced her plans to me, I was ready. I walked into the kitchen one Friday evening to find Tammy waiting, looking nervous. "Kevin, sit down," she said, her voice attempting authority. "We need to talk." I took a seat, my heart pounding but my face calm. She laid out her new rules, explaining how she'd be taking on a lover, and my role would be reduced to cleaning up after their encounters. She slid a small, wrapped box across the table. Inside was a chastity cage, a symbol of her twisted plans. I kept my composure, even as rage boiled inside me. "Is that all?" I asked Dot. She nodded, clearly expecting compliance. "If you don't agree, there will be consequences." I leaned back, feigning nonchalance. "You're supposed to threaten me with divorce, right?" Her expression faltered. I pulled out my phone, sending an email to Stephen's wife with all the evidence, then called Robin, speaking loudly enough for Tammy to hear. "Yeah, honey, your mom laid out her plan. You won't believe what she wants me to do." Tammy's confidence crumbled as I continued. "Tammy, call your bull. Let's see what he has to say." I dialed Stephen's number myself. He answered eagerly, but his tone changed when he realized I was on the line. I warned him to stay away, making it clear that any further threats would end badly for him. Tammy's shock turned to fear. I laid out the divorce papers Jackie had prepared, explaining exactly how things would go. Her plans, her deceit, her manipulation, all of it was exposed. She tried to backpedal, to apologize, but it was far too late. The fallout was swift. Stephen's wife filed for divorce, and his employer fired him for violating company policies. Tammy moved out, defeated and desperate. Over the next few months, we finalized our divorce. She lost her business, her reputation, and most painfully, her relationship with Robin. Standing alone in the ashes of her grand plan, she realized too late that her excitement had cost her everything. For me, there was no going back. I'd fought to reclaim my dignity and protect what truly mattered, and I emerged stronger. Over the next several weeks, I found myself living in a surreal mix of betrayal, anger, and cautious planning. Tammy had moved in with her parents after a particularly nasty confrontation when she tried to convince me to drop the divorce. The house felt different, emptier but somehow calmer. I focused on keeping things normal for Robin, who was still reeling from the reality of her mother's betrayal. She refused to speak to Tammy, barely acknowledging her existence during phone calls and calling her out harshly if they did manage to exchange words. Meanwhile, I worked closely with Jackie Stone to finalize our legal strategy. It was crucial to make sure that Tammy's attempts to manipulate and threaten me through divorce would backfire. In court, we needed to establish her culpability and the extent of her deceit. Jackie was thorough and relentless, leaving no stone unturned. Every piece of evidence, emails, photos, financial records, was meticulously cataloged. One morning, I received a knock at the door. To my surprise, it was Tammy's lawyer requesting a face-to-face meeting to discuss potential resolutions. I had no illusions about this being a civil negotiation. Tammy's lawyer, a slick man with a reputation for intimidation, walked in with Tammy by his side. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes, and her once confident demeanor reduced to something sad and desperate. We sat across the conference table in Jackie's office. Her presence was reassuring, sharp and unflinching. Tammy's lawyer opened with a grandiose speech about putting the past behind us and rebuilding trust for the sake of family. It was all I could do not to roll my eyes. The words were hollow, as if he were reciting lines from a bad script. Then came the predictable counterattack. He claimed I had fabricated the evidence of infidelity and slandered Tammy's name. Jackie, however, was more than ready. Calmly, She slid over a stack of photos, clear, undeniable evidence of Tammy's relationship with Stephen. The shock on her lawyer's face was priceless. He fumbled through excuses, trying to deflect, but it was obvious the wind had been knocked out of their sails. I sat quietly, watching as Jackie methodically dismantled their flimsy arguments. When Tammy's lawyer tried to pivot to demands for a more favorable division of assets, Jackie reminded him of the incriminating financial statements and loan documents that would put Tammy in serious legal jeopardy if challenged. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She was cornered, facing the reality of losing her business and the life she'd built. Then I remembered her cruel plan, her utter disregard for me, and any sympathy I felt evaporated. After the meeting, Tammy requested a private conversation. Jackie stepped out, giving us the room. Tammy's eyes were red-rimmed as she whispered, "I never thought it would come to this." "Neither did I replied coldly. "But you made your choice." "Kevin, I don't want a divorce," she said, her voice cracking. "I was wrong. I got caught up in something I didn't understand." I shook my head. "You knew exactly what you were doing, Tammy. You wanted excitement at my expense. Now you're facing the consequences." She broke down, tears streaming down her face, pleading with me to reconsider. She claimed to have been manipulated by Mistress B, that it was all a fantasy that got out of hand. It was too little, too late. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "This is done. You made your bed, and now you have to lie in it." Over the next few months, the divorce proceedings dragged on. Tammy hired a new, less aggressive lawyer who was more pragmatic about her situation. Her business was sold to cover the settlement, and she moved into a small apartment. Robin refused to speak to her. I could see how it weighed on Tammy, but it wasn't my responsibility to fix what she'd broken. Then came the day we signed the final divorce papers. Tammy barely made eye contact as she agreed to the terms. Her business was gone, she'd lost her standing in the community, and her relationship with Robin was in tatters. She tried to speak to me afterward, but there was nothing left to say. I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in years. A week later, she showed up at my doorstep. I considered closing the door in her face, but something in her expression, desperation mixed with shame, stopped me. "Please, Kevin," she said, her voice hoarse. "I need to talk." I let her in. She looked even worse than before, hair unkempt, eyes hollow. She confessed that she'd hit rock bottom, that she couldn't believe what she'd done. She begged me to help her repair her relationship with Robin. "You're her mother," I said bluntly. "You figure it out." For the first time, I saw genuine regret in her eyes. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She knew she didn't deserve it. She wanted to rebuild what she'd destroyed. I didn't know if it was possible, but it was no longer my problem. I had to let her go to truly move on. As she walked out of my house, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned, but it was the one I'd been dealt. I had to rebuild, just as she did. But unlike her, I had people who truly supported me, who saw my worth. I focused on being a better father to Robin and rediscovering myself. Tammy's betrayal would always be a painful chapter in my life, but it didn't define me. I refused to let it. Slowly, day by day, I found strength, clarity, and a renewed sense of purpose. I'd been broken, but I wasn't beaten. I was ready to start over on my terms. The weeks following the finalization of the divorce felt like a whirlwind. I was trying to navigate life as a newly single man, focusing on myself and rebuilding my relationship with Robin. My daughter had become my anchor. Her unwavering support kept me grounded through the chaos of divorce proceedings and the aftermath of betrayal. Robin, however, was struggling in her own way. While she stayed strong for me, her mother's betrayal cut deeply. The woman who raised her, who she thought she knew, had turned into a stranger almost overnight. I knew Robin blamed herself, at least partially, for not seeing it sooner. I tried to reassure her that it was in no way her fault, but healing would take time for both of us. I poured myself into work and the day-to-day challenges of maintaining our home. My job was demanding, but it was also a welcome distraction. The routines gave me structure, but I knew I couldn't hide behind the familiar forever. Jackie Stone had been more than just a lawyer throughout the process. She'd been a source of wisdom. One afternoon, after another round of legal loose ends, she pulled me aside. "Kevin, it's time to focus on what comes next," she said, her tone kind but firm. "You've done the hard part. Now, you get to decide what you want your life to be." Her words stuck with me. For so long, my life had revolved around Tammy, keeping her happy, maintaining a facade of normalcy, and ultimately untangling myself from her web of betrayal. Now, I had a blank slate. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. The first step was confronting my own feelings about what had happened. I scheduled sessions with a therapist, something I'd never considered before. Talking about my experiences with someone who wasn't emotionally involved was a revelation. I could speak honestly, vent my anger, express my sadness, and gradually start to make sense of it all. My therapist, Dr. Ellis, was a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor and sharp insight. He challenged me to see beyond the pain and look for lessons. "You can't change what Tammy did," he said during one session, "but you can decide how it shapes you moving forward. Are you going to let it make you bitter, or will you use it to become stronger?" It was a question I pondered often. Bitterness was the easy path. It was tempting to wallow in resentment and paint myself as the eternal victim. But that wasn't the person I wanted to be, for Robin, for myself, or for anyone else who might come into my life in the future. Meanwhile, Tammy made several attempts to reach out. She called, texted, and even showed up unannounced a few times. Each time, I kept my distance. I wasn't ready to engage with her beyond what was strictly necessary. Robin, on the other hand, wanted nothing to do with her. One evening, she came home from college for the weekend, and we had a long, tearful conversation. She confessed that she was haunted by memories of happier times with her mother. "How do I reconcile the person she used to be with what she did?" she asked. I didn't have a perfect answer. "I don't know if you can," I told her honestly, "but maybe it's not about reconciling. Maybe it's about accepting that people can change, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. You have every right to be hurt, but you also have the right to choose how much space she takes up in your life." Robin nodded, but I could see the turmoil in her eyes. It would take time. I promised her that I'd be there every step of the way, no matter what she decided about her relationship with Tammy. During this period, I reconnected with old friends and leaned on the support of people who'd been there for me, even when I didn't realize how much I needed them. I went out more, started hiking again, a hobby I'd abandoned over the years, and even took up cooking. It was cathartic to rediscover parts of myself that had been neglected. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine to shape. Then, one day, Tammy reached out with an unexpected request. She wanted to meet, not to plead for reconciliation, but to talk. "I owe you an apology face-to-face," she said. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe away from familiar faces. Tammy looked different. The confident, polished exterior was gone. She seemed smaller, worn down by guilt and regret. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. For everything." I listened without interrupting. She admitted to being blinded by excitement and a need to feel something different. She'd believed the lies of her so-called mentor, and had convinced herself that what she was doing was justified. "It was like I was living in a fantasy world," she said, "and I destroyed everything real in the process." Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her that sorry wasn't enough. But what would that accomplish? Instead, I looked her in the eyes and said, "I don't hate you, Tammy. I hate what you did, but I don't hate you. I hope you find a way to fix things, for yourself and for Robin. But I'm moving forward. I have to." Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. It wasn't closure, but it was a step toward it. The days that followed felt lighter. I focused on what mattered, building a better life for myself and being there for Robin. I wasn't naive. Healing wouldn't be linear, but I was determined not to let bitterness win. I wanted to be proud of the person I'd become despite the betrayal. Not because of it. Life had dealt me a harsh blow, but it hadn't broken me. In fact, it reminded me of who I was, resilient, strong, and ready for whatever came next. In the months that followed, life slowly began to take on a new rhythm. Each day was another step away from the wreckage of my marriage with Tammy and toward something new. The sting of betrayal still lingered, but it was no longer the defining feature of my life. Instead, it had become a scar, a reminder of what I'd endured and what I would never allow myself to experience again. My relationship with Robin continued to improve. She spent more weekends at home, and we developed new routines: father-daughter dinners, movie nights, and even hiking trips. She opened up more about her struggles with trust and her complicated feelings toward her mother. "I want to hate her," she admitted one evening, tears in her eyes. "But it's hard. She's still my mom." I didn't have a simple answer for that. "You don't have to decide how you feel all at once," I told her. "It's okay to be angry, sad, confused, all of it. Just don't let it consume you." Robin nodded, and we sat in silence for a while, letting the weight of it all hang between us. But these conversations, as difficult as they were, also brought us closer. We were learning how to be a family again, even if it looked different than before. One weekend, Robin surprised me with an idea. "Dad, we should take a trip," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Just the two of us. We need a change of scenery." It was the best suggestion I'd heard in a long time. We decided on a road trip. No set destination, just a map, some snacks, and a playlist of songs we both loved, and a few we argued over. The open road was therapeutic. We laughed, reminisced, and talked about the future. For the first time in a long while, I felt a genuine lightness in my chest. As we drove through small towns and wide-open landscapes, I realized that the trip wasn't just about getting away from the past. It was about moving toward something better. Robin and I were rebuilding, not just for ourselves, but for each other. During our travels, we stopped in a charming town nestled by a lake. It was one of those places that felt like a hidden gem, quiet, picturesque, and unhurried. We spent the afternoon kayaking, eating ice cream, and exploring local shops. When we got back to the car, Robin turned to me. "You should buy a place here," she said, only half joking. I laughed, but the idea planted itself in my mind. Why not start fresh somewhere new? When we returned home, I began looking into real estate in the area. The thought of a weekend getaway, a place for Robin and me to escape to, felt like a step toward reclaiming my happiness. Meanwhile, Tammy continued to reach out periodically. She asked for updates about Robin and expressed a desire to repair their relationship. I encouraged Robin to take things at her own pace without pressure. "You don't owe her anything," I reminded her, "but if you decide you're ready, that's your choice." Robin eventually agreed to meet with Tammy in a public place. It was a cautious, tense reunion, but it was a start. Over the following months, they met occasionally, trying to piece together the fragments of their relationship. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always pretty, but I respected Robin's strength and her willingness to confront her pain head-on. For my part, I kept my distance from Tammy. Our lives had diverged, and I was determined to keep it that way. She continued to struggle with the consequences of her actions, selling her business, facing the fallout of her affair, and grappling with the damage she'd done. It was a harsh reality, but it was one she'd created. In contrast, my own path was becoming clearer. I took Dr. Ellis's advice to heart. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could decide how it shaped me. I focused on my career, finding new ways to challenge myself. I joined a volunteer organization using my skills to help others, and I made a point to reconnect with old friends. Relationships I'd neglected during the turmoil of my marriage. One evening, I attended a charity event hosted by the volunteer group. The room buzzed with energy, people mingling, sharing stories, and raising money for a cause that mattered. It was there that I met Elena. She was smart, compassionate, and had a quick wit that kept me on my toes. We started talking, and before I knew it, hours had passed. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark, something I hadn't expected and certainly wasn't looking for. Elena, and I began seeing each other casually. We took things slowly, both of us wary of rushing into anything serious. But as time went on, it became clear that what we had was real. She understood my past without judgment, and I appreciated her honesty and warmth. Robin met her a few months in, and they clicked in a way that surprised me. I didn't want to replace Tammy, and neither did Robin. But Elena brought something new into our lives, a sense of hope and possibility. On the 1-year anniversary of the divorce, I found myself standing on the deck of the lake house I'd finally purchased, a small but cozy retreat where Robin and I could make new memories. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water. Elena stood beside me, her hand in mine, while Robin skipped stones along the shore. In that moment, I realized how far we'd come. The betrayal that once defined my life had become a part of my story, but it no longer controlled me. I had taken back my power, rebuilt my life, and found happiness on my own terms. The pain was real and it had changed me, but it hadn't defeated me. I was stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever lay ahead. Life would never be perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Here's the next story. In the heart of a seemingly perfect marriage, Robert Davis discovers a web of lies that shatters his world. His wife Abigail is entangled in a passionate affair with his colleague Joe Carpenter. As Robert reels from the betrayal, he uncovers an even darker plot. Abigail and Joe are conspiring to murder Samantha, Robert's best friend. Emotions run high as Robert grapples with rage, heartbreak, and a burning desire for justice. His calm facade hides a storm of turmoil as he collaborates with the police, piecing together the sinister plans. Will Robert stop the murderous scheme in time? Brace yourself for a journey through deceit, revenge, and unexpected alliances. This is his story. Watch the reckoning unfold. All right, there might be more charges later, but for now, Abigail, Ruth Davis, I am arresting you for trying to kill Samantha Lloyd Smith. You don't have to say anything. At that moment, my wife fainted. If I had reacted faster, I might have caught her before she fell, but I thought it was a less serious blow than the one she wanted to give Sammy. So I only made a weak attempt to save her, which clearly didn't work. Let me introduce you to the main people in this story. I quote, start with myself. My name is Robert Davis, but my friends call me Rabbi. I'm an accountant, but I didn't expect to be one. I grew up in a tough neighborhood. Most of my friends who didn't end up in jail either found work or stayed unemployed for a long time. I was lucky to get a job at a carpet factory. I quickly showed that I could break any machine I worked on, so I was moved to the warehouse. After some time, my skills at organizing things and my knack for numbers caught the attention of the owner, Griffin Lloyd. He moved me to the control room for no clear reason. I took an accounting class at a local college, found that I really liked it, and did really well. Old man Lloyd noticed and helped me become a chartered accountant. That's when I first met his lovely daughter, Samantha. It's strange to say, but it was dislike at first sight. She was nothing like her father. He was a good man who worked hard. She was spoiled and the only child pampered by her dad and pushed by her ambitious mom to climb the social ladder. I quote, I'm sure you've met people like her. You might know a few. I was just unlucky enough to be her mentor as she moved from easy money to some hard work. What made it harder was that she was incredibly beautiful. She had long blonde hair, a sweet face, and a curvy figure at just 19, with legs that turned heads around the office. And she knew it. To put it simply, she enjoyed teasing people. A few years later, she married Gerald Smythe, a man who seemed perfect for her. She was flirty, and he thought he was something special. She was spoiled, and he was full of himself. She had lots of money, and he needed it to keep up his lifestyle. Now let me introduce the last member of this small group. Meet Abigail Ruth Marley. She worked at the factory and helped with the machines. This meant she sorted the strands of wool or nylon and ran the machines that wound them onto plastic cones for the threads used in weaving. She grew up in the same neighborhood as I did, but while I wanted to learn more, she chose to rely on her looks. Abby thought her beauty would help her escape tough times. She believed all she needed was a man who would notice her appearance and charm and take her away from struggles to an easier life, and I think you can guess who she had in mind. I wasn't naive, and I had seen enough to know better. Still, Abby was difficult to resist. She was 22 and truly stunning. Her short black hair made her look almost like a boy, but it somehow made her look even more feminine. Her big brown eyes sparkled with life, and her slim body had all the curves in the right places. At that time, our company was busy making a big order for green carpets for some government buildings to finish on time. The boss asked us to work extra hours in the evenings. The machines ran until midnight, and one of the main workers had to make sure everything was turned off and locked up. Since I was one of those workers, I had to take on extra shifts. I ended up working more because Samantha couldn't skip her social events, and the boss was already sick. It was early December, and many people wanted to work late to earn extra money for Christmas. That night, the snow began to fall. Snow is rare where we live, so no one was ready for it, worried that people might not make it home safely. I let everyone leave an hour early and went through my usual routine before stepping out into the cold and locking up the factory. I felt good driving my Land Rover, even though there was already a bit of snow on the roads. Just as I was leaving the parking lot, I saw Abby all alone at the bus stop. I stopped to check if she was okay, and she told me her ride had let her down because her sister wasn't driving well in the snow. I knew her sister's car. A Mondeo wasn't great for snowy roads, so I offered her a ride. She gratefully accepted, especially since she was shivering from the cold. I even let her use my phone to text her sister and let her know she was fine. During the drive, we chatted happily. Abby talked about how the supervisor had agreed to move her to a new job after the holidays. She would become a picker, which meant checking every piece of carpet for mistakes and fixing them. I might have been flirting a bit. At that time, I didn't have a girlfriend, and like I said, Abby was very attractive, so it felt completely natural. I told her that someone as pretty as her should look for a better job than this one. We laughed, and I really enjoyed our time together during the 30-minute ride. When we reached her house, she asked me if I wanted to come in for coffee, but I said no politely. Instead, she thanked me with a kiss. Now there are different kinds of kisses. If my feet hadn't been on the ground, that kiss would have knocked my socks off. She knew how much it affected me. I could see her big smile as she got out of the car and said goodbye. That night, I didn't sleep well. Over the years, I had many chances to have fun with some of the women at the factory, both single and married, but I stayed away. I knew it could create problems, especially if one person was in management and the other in production. So I tried to put it out of my mind and keep my distance until the last day before the holidays. At lunch that day, the machine stopped. We had a big Christmas dinner in the cafeteria, and most people brought their own food. Everyone was in a good mood because we all got paid. Our salaries were higher due to extra hours, and we received a bonus for finishing our work early and for the holidays. But there was some worry because Griffin Lloyd was in the hospital, and I think everyone was concerned. Griffin was a well-liked boss who treated his workers well, but we all wondered who would take charge if something happened to him. The other directors included his wife, who rarely visited the factory. There was Samantha, who had become less arrogant over time. Then there was her husband, who believed he was an important figure and had big plans to change how we worked. And then there was me, the company's chief accountant. There were also 3 other minor shareholders who came to meetings just for free food and drinks. It was no surprise that people were worried, but soon enough the party was in full swing. They moved the tables, the music started, and everyone began to dance and enjoy themselves. At my age, being single and earning a good salary, I was seen as a desirable bachelor, and some women showed interest. But Abby had her sights set on me, and I only danced with others while she was busy. I was surprised to find myself dancing next to Sammy. I had never seen her at these casual parties before, so it was unexpected when standing under some mistletoe. She gave me a sweet but simple kiss. It was even more surprising when she whispered to me, "Be careful with Abby. She's trying to catch you, and you might find someone even better." As soon as the music stopped and everyone went their own way, Gerald came in with a big wave dot. He wished everyone a happy holiday and then left with someone else. She was probably right about things, but I didn't see it then. About 10 minutes later, Abby showed up again. She stayed until I had to close the plant just as I was getting ready to leave. She suddenly said, "Oh no, I left my other shoes in storage, Dot." She explained that she had switched from her flat shoes to the ones she wore to dance. I walked back inside with her. I had a feeling I knew what might happen, but honestly, I didn't mind at all. She took me through rows of carpet until we found a spot where small rugs were stacked. Her shoes were in a bag on the floor, just like she said, Dot being the nice guy that I am. I bent down to grab them. When I stood up, she was really close, holding up a piece of mistletoe. The kiss we shared was even better than the first one. If I wanted to keep it simple and funny about what happened next, I'd say it was amazing and I definitely enjoyed it, Dot, but it was a nice memory I often think about. She wrapped her arms around my neck and stood on her tiptoes to reach me, and our lips touched. To be honest, there wasn't much talking. "I know," she said softly. "That feels nice." After our first kiss, we didn't really say much else. Without really saying it out loud, we decided to sit on a small pile of carpets and kiss deeply, Dot. It felt great, and it seemed like it could go on forever until I was finally worn out. Then she pushed me back and took out some tissues from her bag. She caught my eye while drying herself off and said, "Do you know how much these rugs cost?" I smiled. "I'm an accountant." Then she laughed, finished up, and gave me a tight hug. "Dot." "That was a bit quick," she said. "Sorry," I replied, but she kissed me again and said, "Don't worry, it was really nice. But if you want to make amends to me, I don't mind if we do it somewhere else." "Where were you thinking?" I asked. "Well, I don't know. It will not be fun at my house. My parents are busy preparing for Christmas at my aunt's house, and my sister and her boyfriend could be waiting to use the bedroom." I then jokingly asked, "What about my car?" I wasn't sure how serious she would take it. I took Abby to my apartment, which has 2 bedrooms and a beautiful view of the sea. She seemed impressed after we took showers and spent some time together in my large bed. She wanted to check out my place. You know how someone inspects a house they might want to buy? That is what she did. She was very pleased with the bathroom, which was much larger than the one in her previous home. She laughed a lot when I explained what a bidet was because she had never seen one before. She also appreciated the spacious closets and storage in the bedroom. She also smiled when she was in the kitchen, Dot. It had many tools that I rarely used and opened into a dining area. She appeared very excited about it. She said she enjoyed cooking and that having a nice kitchen was one of her goals. However, it was the living room that truly amazed her. I'd grown accustomed to the view, but her enthusiasm reminded me of the first time I saw the bay and its waves. I may have said something cheesy about how the view is better with her around. She hugged, kissed, and thanked me. We were soon snuggled up under the blankets. The following day was Christmas Eve, and we awoke to find everything covered in a beautiful frost. After our pleasant conversation, she expressed a desire to prepare breakfast, Dot. She demonstrated her culinary expertise. We sat around the dining table and talked. We quickly began discussing our plans for the following day. I planned to reheat a meal, watch television, and spend some time online. She had a lot to think about, such as whether to watch TV or deal with the noise coming from her sister's bedroom, Dot. It appeared that we should devise more effective strategies. I took her home so she could pack a few belongings. I went to the grocery store and got everything she needed for a nice lunch. It felt good, even if I didn't want to think about how I might be being taken advantage of. We had a wonderful holiday together, attending a Christmas service in the town square that evening and sharing a bag of roasted chestnuts on our way home on Christmas Day, Dot. We enjoyed each other's company and tried to make the day memorable. The next day, I took her to the local skydiving club and told her how much I needed the adrenaline rush of jumping out of planes to break up my boring work week. She had doubts, but she was brave. She made her first jump with an instructor in early February, Dot. She then jumped 6 more times in a month before jumping alone for the first time in early March. When she landed, I gave her an engagement ring. It was sentimental and romantic, but someone had to ruin the mood by saying something offensive about working-class kids marrying. I unconsciously turned to see Gerald Smythe with a disgusted expression on his face. I punched his stomach as hard as I could. I heard his breath, woo, shout, and I saw him fall to his knees, stunned and perplexed. Then there was a loud sound as he threw up everything he had just eaten onto the grass. "You idiot," I overheard Samantha say. I wanted to argue with her until I realized she was speaking with her husband, Sorry, Robbie, she said, turning to face me. He had a few drinks at lunch and can't stop talking. Then she turned away without looking at us again. Abby and I stood there surprised when Gerald got up. He mumbled as he wiped vomit from his small beard. "You made a huge mistake, Davis. Only one lucky hit. This does not mean that it is over, not at all. If you want more, simply tell Jerry." I growled and turned away. Abby was still shocked, so I took her hand and we left. Our engagement did not go as planned, but we made it through the day and married a few months later. We weren't comfortable working together, so Abby quit her job after our honeymoon in Tenerife. She found a new job at a recruitment agency near our apartment. Even though she never paid much attention to school, she was smart enough to fit in at work. I believe they hired her primarily because she looked nice at the front desk. Things seemed to be going well for us in the first few years. We were not wealthy, but our combined income allowed us to live comfortably. My lovely young wife was an excellent housekeeper and cook. She was also very creative in other areas. I knew she had previous experience. She never hid it, but I did. So I had nothing to complain about when we both started skydiving. We just had to pay for the jumps and occasionally purchase new gear. Overall, we were living comfortably. Abby enjoyed buying new clothes, which sometimes got out of hand. We even had a small argument about it. I often gave in to her. There were times when I had to stand my ground. Things became tense at work. Gerald attempted to demonstrate his authority following Griffin Lloyd's death, but I knew he only owned a small portion of the company. Samantha held the majority. Fortunately, things were resolved quickly. During a board meeting, he attempted to fire me, but Samantha defended me. Before anyone considers supporting this, she stated, "I want to say that Robbie taught me everything I know about this business. Honestly, I believe he is the only one who truly understands how everything works. Vote if you want. But as chairman and the person with the most chairs, I will not allow it." There was a brief silence as they stared at each other, and then Gerald backed down. We all knew Samantha was really in charge. He squandered the money his parents had left him. They had been keeping a close eye on him, and I could tell he wanted me out of the picture because I made sure he couldn't use the company funds. They remained behind to talk after everyone else had left. I was about to turn back to get my notes when I heard Gerald's voice. "Have you always liked that Davis guy? I know exactly what you like about him. What has he taught you? When he is present, you act very excited." I didn't want to hear any more, so I quietly walked away and went back to my office. I still didn't quite understand what I had just heard. Samantha and I did not get along at first. I thought she was careless, and she probably assumed I was dull because of my past. I assumed she thought I was too simple for her, and all her teasing was intended to get at me. Was I wrong? It was too late to consider that. Not that I was sorry because my marriage was good, whereas hers was not. I adored my wife, and she was still gorgeous. That's what mattered. But it made me think. That night, I told Abby about the board meeting, but I'm glad I didn't tell her what Gerald said because she abruptly cut me off. "Beware of that arrogant woman. I quote, "V always known she liked you. She'd want to get you for herself, and if she does, I will make certain she pays for it." "You don't want a three-way, do you?" I asked. For a moment, I suspected she was furious. Then she looked at me and began laughing, calling me rude names and saying things I can't recall now. So things were going well for me at the time. I had a decent job that paid well, albeit a little boring. I also had a wonderful, caring wife. Plus, there was a wealthy and attractive woman who appeared to want me, and I had enough money to pursue an exciting hobby. I can't pinpoint exactly when things began to go wrong. It probably took a while for me to notice, but it definitely started to shift. The first sign of trouble occurred when Abby abruptly stopped wanting to skydive. It did not happen slowly. It was as quick as flipping a switch. We had fantastic weather that summer, with plenty of opportunities to jump from planes and fall quickly to the ground. I understand it sounds dangerous, and there are between 50 and 70 deaths per year, dot. The majority of people believe that equipment failures are common, but this is not true. The majority of accidents are the result of simple mistakes and carelessness. The risk of death for trained skydivers is approximately 1 in every 100,000 jumps. To put that into perspective, if you drive 10,000 miles per year, your chances of dying in a car accident are approximately 1 in 6,000. Abby understood this. We quote D discussed it several times, but she began to believe that, for unknown reasons, women faced more risks than men. So she decided to stop. Her final jump was a tandem jump we did together on her 24th birthday, a few months after our first anniversary. She returned a few weeks later to watch me jump. But she went on to say that watching was more stressful than jumping, so she stopped coming. I was considering quitting too, but she encouraged me to keep going as long as I enjoyed it. Surprisingly, Samantha was alone during her second week of observation. Gerald had injured his back in a fall from his horse and would need a long time to recover before he could jump again. But Abby didn't seem concerned about Samantha and I being together. I continued skydiving, and Samantha became my regular partner in this hobby, not my wife. Do not get the wrong idea. Samantha and I were on good terms by then. She had changed significantly since I first met her. She was no longer the conceited person I used to know. Aside from becoming a successful businesswoman, she was a pleasure to be around. We laughed a lot and enjoyed each other's company, but that was all. Did I like her? Yes, I did. Did she like me? I was unsure whether either of us wanted to do anything about it. In any case, we became close friends. We talked frequently and shared some trust. That quote SY one Sunday, we were floating in the air on warm winds rather than falling to the ground. I couldn't understand why she looked so down afterwards. We sat in a small club sipping cold drinks while I tried to figure out what was bothering her. She initially denied any wrongdoing, but after I gently and patiently inquired, she finally opened up. Robbie, what would you do if you suspected your partner was cheating on you? What do you mean? I asked. I do not know. I really don't know, she said, sounding concerned. But I believe Gerald may be having an affair. Oh my God. Really? I responded, surprised and unsure whether I wanted to discuss it further. Yes, seriously? She replied with a slight smile. Listen, Robbie. I don't want to bother you, but I need to speak with someone I trust. Well, I can't think of many people right now. I said, sure, but I'm serious. Everyone at work is a little scared of who I am, and lately I feel more and more unhappy with our so-called friends. I think many women in my situation would talk to their moms about this, but let's not get into that. This made me smile. Her mom only cared about her place in society. I knew she wanted Samantha and Gerald together because he came from a good family. Gerald's family had old money, which made their new wealth seem better. Honestly, I worried that after her husband died, the old lady would take most of his money. She and I had some tough times before, so I just nodded to show I understood. You quote one of the few people who treats me well, Robbie. No, don't argue with that. When I was difficult at work, you put me in my place. You did it kindly, but were also ready to give me compliments when I earned them. You might be quiet, Robbie, but you stand up for yourself. You solve problems on your own. You don't run to others for help, and I know you don't care for gossip or scandals. You've proven to me that I can trust you. Honestly, you're probably the only one I can trust. Wow, that makes me feel good, I said, maybe sounding too sure of myself. But when I saw her eyes were wet with unsaid tears, I switched my tone. Listen, I'm your friend, Sammy. I wouldn't have said that when we first met. I was a real trouble back then. But you've changed a lot since then. Truly, you have. If there is anything I can do for you, just say the word. Well, you know. I trailed off, unsure. I need you to promise to keep what I'm about to say a secret. Robbie, can you do that? I started to nod, but she added even to Abby, and I had to think. I don't like secrets, but since it didn't involve her directly, I thought it wouldn't hurt. Finally, I agreed and promised to keep her secret no matter what. She spoke softly, starting to explain. You probably know that things are not good between me and Gerald, and since you're smart, you likely see we haven't been happy for some time. Well, maybe I'm not that smart, but I just didn't think about it. I couldn't stand the man. I thought he was fake, lazy, and just plain foolish. But I don't usually check on other couples to see if they are happy. It's not my business. So I stayed quiet and let her keep talking. At first, things were good. It seemed like we were equals. Do you know? My dad wasn't sure about Gerald, but my mom thought he was great. She said, "At least you know he's not just after your money." But she was wrong, Robbie. I soon found out that he had almost no money when we got married. He made up a story about bad investments and dishonest partners. Oh, just too much. I still cared for him, but maybe I was a bit too trusting. I believed everything he said. My dad figured him out quickly. He gave him easy tasks that he couldn't mess up. He also paid him a lot of money, more than it was worth. But Dad made me promise not to let him waste what Dad worked hard to earn before our first year was over. I found out he was seeing someone else. He told me he was meeting clients when in fact he was with a secretary at Dad's law firm. Remember when you questioned his spending? He was really shocked. You came to me about it, but you didn't have to. He was already scared and dropped her quickly. That increased his dislike for you, Robbie. Because I didn't tell you, I asked around. I checked your notes to learn more. I know most people don't look at them, but you always checked yours thoroughly. You taught me the importance of being thorough in business, so I went through them. Don't look guilty, Robbie. I already knew your notes. Just proved it. There were others, too. At least he stopped attempting to use company funds for his wrongdoings. I confronted him, and he denied everything. He explained that his job as head of sales required him to have fun after work. However, his position was not particularly important. I spoke softly. I figured it out over time. It was simply a title my father gave him to make him appear important. I now know that Freddie Watson brought in the majority of the new business. She paused, and I stepped in. If you knew he was cheating, why did you put up with it? And why have you decided to confront him now? I put up with it, she said quietly, partly to avoid a fight with my mother, but also because I no longer wanted to sleep with him. We had a heated argument about some strange topics. I won't go into detail, but we ended up sleeping in separate rooms. Regarding your second question, all of his previous relationships were brief and unimportant to him. Most were with friends' wives. I believe it helped him feel better about himself. It was as if he was trying to prove his strength by accumulating many minor victories. But what he's doing now seems very different. How do you tell? I asked. It all began when he started spending too much time on his computer. He was online for longer than usual. When I looked around, I discovered that many things were password protected, which concerned me. I tried to convince myself that he was just watching adult videos or reading stories he didn't want me to know about, but I couldn't stay calm until, it might sound strange, I asked an old school friend who is very knowledgeable about these things to assist me. Of course, I did not tell her the complete truth. I just said it belonged to someone I suspected was sharing confidential information about our contract ideas with a competitor. Anyway, she included some sort of fancy device. A week later, she returned, took it off, and gave me a list of all the passwords. She made it really simple. It did not take long for me to figure out what the passwords were. Gerald exchanged hundreds of emails with a woman calling herself Mrs. Horton. I saved the copies and read them all. There were so many emails, and they had been going on for more than 6 months. The majority of them, particularly the earlier ones, were exactly as expected. There were many romantic notes, but also a lot of rude messages about what they wanted to do together. I will not lie. These made me uncomfortable. I mean, Sammy, I am not a prude, but I sincerely apologize. I said this as she took out a small handkerchief and attempted to wipe her tears discreetly. The thing is, Robbie, I can handle it all. In a way, I was relieved that he had someone else to meet his needs, disgusting as it was. At the very least, I did not have to. But the last few emails started to scare me. They began talking about when they would both be free to be together. They kept mentioning some kind of plan to get me and her husband out of the way, but they didn't explain how it worked. She reminded him that everything had to be written down so he wouldn't get rid of her after she helped him get his money. I, quote, am scared, Robbie. I'm very scared. Why didn't you contact the police? I inquired, because it would probably make me appear foolish if they had to. I am sure they would simply say it was a game, some strange twist. They could claim it was just online chatting, that they were discussing fantasies, and that nothing occurred. Anyway, there's no direct threat to me, is there? When you really think about it, you're not sure who this woman is. No, I don't know. At first, I suspected it was one of the women on our local hospice fundraising committee. I know Gerald likes her, but I ruled her out after seeing one of her reports. Or, whoever Mrs. Horton is, she frequently confuses E and I when writing words like relief and never capitalizes them. I believe at that point, some of the other members joined us, fresh from their fun and eager to talk for hours about the joys of flying high in the sky. So we had to halt the conversation. I eventually had to leave and simply told everyone to be careful. But Sammy realized I was really talking to her. I was deep in thought as I drove home. Honestly, if I hadn't promised Samantha, I might not have told Abby what had happened. It might not have mattered anyway because Abby and I were having difficulties in our relationship after only a few months together. I found two things about Abby that bothered me. First, she was constantly flirting with other men. It wasn't a big deal, but it appeared to come naturally when she looked at them with her big brown eyes. They acted like excited puppies vying for her attention. I couldn't blame her for enjoying the attention, especially if the guy was attractive and she never went too far. She was always quick to introduce me as her husband and make sure I was involved in the conversation. Still, comma. I was uneasy whenever I saw how those guys looked at her and then at me as if they felt sorry for me. We discussed it several times. She consistently said the same thing. It means nothing. He was simply being friendly. I did not invite him over. Should I be rude? Do you want me to hide from other guys who think I am attractive? I dress well and my clothing is not too revealing. And if I still appeared unhappy, she would say something like, "Come on, Robbie, do you want me to wear a burqa when we go out?" So I tried to deal with it, but I still felt upset. When I told her how I felt, she pulled back a little. Things settled down for a week or two, but it happened again when my car was in the shop and she arrived to pick me up from work. If I had been in my office, I would not have noticed her parking at the employee entrance, but I was in Freddie Watson's office going over a large contract. He wanted to visit Belgium and was trying to figure out how to reduce transportation costs. Fortunately, comma. Freddie's back was to the window, so I was the only one who saw Abby get out of her little Mazda and greet 3 former co-workers. Now, greeting old friends with a smile is one thing, but they went too far. Each guy kissed her on the lips and held her tightly. One even rubbed up against her. I quickly ended my conversation with Freddie and dashed to the main entrance. I arrived just as she parked in my spot. I rarely make snap decisions, which is why I've stayed out of trouble. So I accepted her kiss on the cheek as I got into the car and reflected silently on what I had just witnessed. I casually asked her if she had just arrived, and when she said yes, I knew I needed to take action. She was stunned and didn't know what to say when I told her what I had seen. She tried to explain that they were just old friends, but I became very angry. It was the first time she saw me lose my composure. I shouted, "I don't care who they are or what they did. I don't care if they were with you before we met. If I ever see you acting like that with a man again, you will leave immediately and return to your parents before you can say anything." There were many tears that night, but I made it clear that I meant what I said. Then there was another issue. It started with what we did in bed. We tried a variety of activities and had a great time. Sure, there were times when we weren't in the mood, but these were rare. She gradually developed an appetite for more. This was fine for a while after we bought her a toy online. She enjoyed it so much that I joked that we should buy batteries in bulk to save money. A few weeks later, she ordered a larger one. It became a part of our fun, but I suspected she used it when I wasn't home. Then she started reading online stories about various couples. At first, the stories were typical, with couples having fun. We learned a few things from them and became excited about others. However, she soon began reading stories about cheating. I didn't like them much. When she realized this, she turned to stories about couples swapping partners and open relationships. I wasn't entirely comfortable, but there was no lying in those stories. She discovered a website where some of the stories were well-written and appeared genuine. I asked her if those stories excited her, and after a few refusals, she finally admitted that she used them as fantasies while we were together. It may appear strange to others, but it did not bother me because I had previously considered similar ideas. The problem arose when she began to misunderstand my acceptance. She started asking more and more questions. What? I would really like to watch her with someone else or try swapping partners with another couple. She said she was just curious and wasn't trying to push me. But one night, she pushed too hard. I suggested that if these stories were making her think too much, she should stop reading them. It appeared that she had finally realized I wasn't that type of person. Then she started purchasing more toys. She explained that she wanted to ensure that we never grew tired of each other. She wanted to be sweet at work, perfect in the kitchen, and open in the bedroom so that I wouldn't want to look for anyone else. I couldn't argue with her, but I said I was content with the way things were. For several weeks, I was unsure what would arrive in the mail each day. There were some very small but bold pieces of lingerie. Then came an assortment of strange toys. I tried to keep up with what she wanted, but I wasn't really interested. It wasn't my thing, so I was either too gentle or too rough at times. But I must admit she liked it. She had read some very exciting stories. One Friday night, she told me about them, but I pretended to be asleep. When I returned home from the skydiving club the next day, I could hear her calling from my bedroom. I was happy because my day had gone well, and the idea of having some fun in the bedroom sounded appealing until I arrived. She wore a tight leather outfit with black stockings and high heels. She looked stunning, but she was holding a whip in one hand and a pair of handcuffs with fur in the other. "Come on," she said, growling. "I am going to tie you to the bed and give you a night to remember." "No," I responded gently. I wanted to say more, but I knew she had worked hard to set this up. I had no idea where she got the idea that I'd like this. "I am not asking you. I am telling you." "Take off your clothing," she said, attempting to sound tough as she tossed the handcuffs onto the bed and tapped the whip. I just stared at her for a moment before admitting I was hungry. If she didn't have anything prepared, I'd order some food. For a brief moment, she appeared surprised that I had declined. Then her eyes grew angry. Her breathing quickened, and she started shouting at me. Suddenly, I was the bad guy who wanted to spoil her fun. She claimed I was boring and afraid to try new things. I simply did not want to share my personal feelings with anyone. I quietly turned away, instructed her to dress, and went downstairs to order pizza. I didn't see her again until later that night, and nothing was resolved for the next few months. I tried to talk about it several times, explaining that I didn't like the idea of being tied up or tying someone else up. I also disliked giving or receiving pain. Not at all. "You do not want to try anything," she complained. "If you never try something, how will you know what you don't like? Was it my fault for not wanting to see my dreams come true?" These conversations always ended in the same way. She'd lie down and tell me to take whatever I wanted because she didn't care about her own desires. I'd say something like "maybe another time" before rolling over and falling asleep. This continued for months, back and forth. In between these moments, we had passionate exchanges, but I never knew how she would react. The following day, I began to believe that if things did not improve soon, it would be best for both of us to end our marriage, even though I wanted to believe we were still in love. I knew this couldn't last forever. I wasn't likely to go home and talk to Abby about Samantha's problems today. The more I thought about it, the more certain I was. The waiting made no sense. The best option would be for her to contact the police and at least document her concerns. When I arrived home Sunday evening, Abby was not there. I remembered her saying she might go see her mother, so her absence did not surprise me. As usual, I found some ready-made food in the freezer and microwaved it. After that, I called her phone. She was drinking at the Forrester pub with her sister. It was quiet on my end, but her sister was talking loudly in the background. Abby said she'd be home in a few hours. After I warned her not to drive, she said she'd call me when she was ready to be picked up. Not sure what else to do. I decided to go online and check the day's sports scores. I used Abby's laptop because mine was still in the car. I logged in. I found what I needed and then began searching through various folders. One was labeled miscellaneous, and when I opened it, there were hundreds of icons and numerous subfolders. I'd opened it before, so I knew it contained old photos and stories. She had attempted to write, but had frequently abandoned the process. It was also where she downloaded stories from a website she enjoyed. Knowing this, I began looking at what she was reading to better understand her ideas. The most recent stories revealed that she had been reading about very passionate relationships, as well as a lot of stories about wives, most of which involved cheating. I sighed, realizing that this was not helping her understand our problems. Then I noticed one story that seemed very different from the others. I found something called system information and clicked on it. Inside was a folder labeled Do Not Change. I kept opening folders until I came across one that warned me that opening it could damage the computer. Anyone with common sense would recognize that warning as silly. After a few more folders, I came across the link for the email icon and clicked on it without thinking. It did not surprise me when it requested a password. I stared at it for a moment before typing Mrs. Wet, and it opened. Inside, I noticed that some words were misspelled and had no capital letters, as Abby usually did. I took a long time to complete what I believed I should do. I barely glanced at some old photos Abby had made me take or that she had taken herself. I rushed through the task and deleted everything related to her before turning off the computer. Right then, the phone rang. I sighed heavily. I got in the car and drove to the pub to pick her up. There was a man named Joe there. He worked in a factory and was 28 years old. This was probably only his 7th jump, and he screamed as he hit the ground. Then there was a silence like I'd never experienced before. Everyone stood there, stunned, staring at where he fell with a loud thud that I swear we all heard. The first to move was the ambulance crew, who were always present at our events. They had previously treated a few ankle sprains and cuts, but nothing like this had ever occurred. They rushed to help, flashing their lights, but they were ineffective. My first thought was to hope Joe had died immediately. The other option was that he would remain severely injured for the rest of his life. I witnessed his fall. I don't usually pay attention to these things, but he was Abby's friend. She had persuaded him to come along. I believe she wanted them all to have fun during the boring afternoon, and I clearly saw what happened. One of the most common fears among skydivers is the horseshoe problem. Without going into too much detail, this occurs when the parachute opens but remains attached to the skydiver in a way that prevents it from functioning properly. This usually happens when the pin that keeps the parachute packed comes loose, allowing the release bag to come off. In situations like this, skydivers can frequently use a backup parachute as a safety precaution. Here is the rewritten text. In most of these cases, the pilot chute is knocked loose while falling. As it falls, the main and reserve parachutes become entangled, and the person hits the ground, almost always fatally. This is not a common occurrence, and you can practice how to fix it on the ground, but it feels very different from falling quickly toward it. Who knows if someone will remember what to do in a moment of panic? Joe had just finished a conversation with Samantha and me in the equipment room. He seemed to admire her and looked down on me. I understood why he felt that way, but as I watched the ambulance rush toward Joe's lifeless body, I suppressed my emotions. I had plenty to do, attempting to comfort Samantha. Her head dug into my chest as she cried and shook, lost and barely in control of her emotions. I couldn't blame her for watching someone fall as hard as anyone else, but it's especially bad for the person who lent them their parachute. It could have been me, Robbie, I heard her say weakly, between sobs. It could have been fine. I responded gently, hoping to comfort her. I wrapped my left arm around her shoulders and gently stroked her beautiful blonde hair with my right hand. I could feel her shaking body as she pressed against me, hoping to find comfort in our hug. We remained like this for several minutes before I pulled back and sat her down on one of the benches near the club's entrance. She was still crying, saying, "It's all my fault. I shouldn't have," but her tears were too strong and she couldn't finish her thoughts. I was about to sit beside her and help her feel better when I noticed Mark Haley coming our way. Mark Haley was a detective sergeant, and he was a welcome sight like me. He was one of the few people from our old neighborhood who hadn't turned to the wrong side. He was on the Parachute Club's committee too, but he was much older, probably in his late 40s. He was a really nice guy, and I always got along well with him. "Who was it?" "Robbie." He asked right away. "The schedule said it was you and Sammy. How does this happen?" "We switched with Joe and Donald. It's in the manifest." I explained Donna's using my parachute. Joe took Sammy's parachute. But there's something more important, Mark. He raised his eyebrows, urging me to go on. I don't think it was an accident. I have a strong feeling this was done on purpose and it needs to be looked into. You should send your team here to gather evidence or something. They're on their way, Dot, he assured me. Do you know something that I don't? We both understand, I said, looking at Sammy. But I think you should talk to me now. Poor Sammy is really shaken up. We both needed to share what we saw and what we knew about the accident. Mark and his boss, Detective Inspector Kelsey, set up their base in a small room we usually used for meetings. We were taken in one by one to tell our side of what happened. The airfield was closed off while we were being questioned. People who gave their statements could go home, but no one else could come into the area until things were wrapped up. While I waited, I sat by a window and looked outside. There wasn't much happening. A few people in special suits were moving around where Joe had landed. Another group was checking the Smog 92 plane, the one that had flown him on his last trip. There were still questions about whether Joe was alive. Rumors started going around that he was hanging on, likely because the ambulance had left with its sirens and lights on dot. But I thought the St. John crew was just as shocked as everyone else. Samantha sat across the room being comforted by a policewoman. I couldn't tell if she was asleep because she hardly moved. Mark was very organized. They first called in people who didn't see much. Their statements were quick. Then came those who were outside watching a figure scream and wave as it fell. Lastly, they brought in Samantha, the pilot of the plane. I knew she would take longer, so I got comfortable and waited. When I was younger, I used to smoke, but not a lot. I never smoked more than 10 cigarettes a day, and it was easy for me to quit. But sitting there alone, except for a police officer near the door, I felt the urge to smoke again. We were instructed to turn off our phones, so I was unable to contact anyone outside. I suppose the news had spread, and all I could think about were the concerns of the friends and families of those who were supposed to jump that day. Samantha finally came out after what seemed like forever. She appeared pale and shaky, and I assumed she could barely stand without the assistance of the policewoman. The policewoman looked at me and said, "Mr. Davis." I nodded and she added, "You can go in now." When I stood up, Samantha looked at me with teary eyes and said, "I'm not going home, Robbie. I'll be in the hotel for a while. Call me as soon as you can, okay? Please." I only nodded. Seeing her like that made me feel terrible. I was so nervous that I thought I wouldn't be able to speak. I walked into the meeting room and noticed 3 people seated at the long table. I sat down and they introduced themselves to me. Detective Robertson was the first to ask for my full name, where I lived, my birthday, and other details. Then he asked if I was a member of the club, and I informed him that I was the treasurer. Even though they said they were recording everything and showed me the recording equipment, he still took notes. Next came Mark's turn. "Robbie, could you please tell me about your qualifications? Do you like to parachute?" I responded, "Well, I took the course to become an instructor." "Oh, I am referring to the instructor certification course. I've only had it for a few months. I need to have it for at least a year with my jump master certification before I can teach others. I also have a master packer's certificate, which allows me to perform minor repairs and pack parachutes. If you want to know about all of my jumps, I keep a journal and can share some with you." Mark interrupted what I was about to say. "Is everything all right, Robbie?" Then, speaking gently, Detective Inspector Kelsey asked Mr. Lloyd, "Does this mean you pack parachutes?" I replied, "I sometimes pack them." "The instructor prefers to pack his own, and those are for his students. He's probably already told you that. I always pack my own parachute, and the one that my wife uses. I packed for Samantha a few times recently. Have you packed it for her today?" Kelsey inquired, looking at me seriously. "She brought it, already packed. I believe her husband did it. You'll need to ask her about it. He is qualified to pack and did so every time until he stopped coming after being injured. Is it possible to speak about her husband?" Mark spoke and I was cut off. "We know Robbie. Samantha told us everything. You don't have to worry about it anymore. For the time being, let us discuss what occurred and what you witnessed, with only a few questions to clear things up." I explained how I got to the club earlier. The first thing I did was check the time I was supposed to board the plane. Then I went through the usual steps, such as checking the jump height, wind direction, top speed, and other important details. Then I noticed Sammy arrive and went to greet her. I wanted to tell her what I had discovered, but she appeared concerned about something else. She informed me that she wanted to discuss a personal matter. "What personal issue are we discussing?" Detective Inspector Kelsey inquired. I replied, "I can't be sure." We didn't have much privacy before. Well, something happened to change that. But I believe I know what it was about. They didn't say much more and asked me to continue my story. There wasn't much more to say. I went into the office and changed the schedule so we didn't have to leave at the scheduled time. There were a few open slots later, so I requested to be moved to one of them. Sammy and I had just bought sodas and sat at a quiet table when Joe and his friend Donald arrived. They said they heard we weren't going as planned and wanted to borrow our parachutes. I asked if there were any spare parachutes left. There are usually plenty and in good condition, but there was a party, possibly a corporate event, and they wouldn't have time to pack them again. So Sammy gave Joe a parachute, and I let Donald use mine. I knew we'd have plenty of time to pack them back up before our next call. Kelsey asked me why Joe wasn't using the static line. I mentioned that he was a Category 3 jumper. He could have pulled his own cord, but he should not have waited so long. You need to be a Category 4 jumper to wait 10 seconds before pulling it. Without trying to be mean, I believe he enjoys showing off, Mark said as Kelsey raised his eyebrows. Someone who tries to accomplish more than they are capable of. They asked me a few more questions about what I saw, which was not very different from what everyone else saw. Then the questions changed, suddenly. "How well do you know Joseph Carpenter, Mr. Davis?" Kelsey asked me. I noticed he used the present tense, so I responded. "He works in a carpet factory, so I know him a little." I could not say I knew him well. He's only been there a few years, and I spend most of my time in the office now. "So you are his boss?" Kelsey asked. I said, "I guess so, but not directly. Each department has its own manager, while the workshop has a senior foreman. I'm just a member of the management team." There was a pause while the detective took notes. Then I noticed a look between Mark and Kelsey, as if they were communicating silently. Finally, Kelsey looked me in the eyes and said, "Mr. Davis, did you know Joseph Carpenter was having an affair with your wife?" For a moment, I just stared at him, and I'm sure he noticed the surprise on my face. I managed to say, "Excuse me." I asked him to repeat what he had said. He looked embarrassed as he glanced at his notes and said, "Some people claim they dated before and after your wedding. It appears that something significant occurred earlier this year, and I was unaware. Did you know I was at a loss for words?" And I'm sure my expression showed how confused and hurt I was. The other men in the room appeared as perplexed and hurt as I was. I closed my eyes and allowed my head to drop. When I opened my eyes again, I noticed a bottle of water being pushed toward me. Mark said, "Sorry, Robbie, if you didn't know, this is a difficult way to find out." "But who? How does this happen?" I could not believe it. I knew they were friends, but Mark said, "Don't worry, Robbie. I'm surprised you weren't aware." It's not exactly common knowledge, but he liked to tell his coworkers that he believed his job was secure because, well, don't stop there, tell me more. Mark explained that the man thought I was aware of his relationship with Abby, but he assumed I didn't care because he thought he could make her happier than I could. It was too much for me. I nearly lost it and stood up so quickly that my chair overturned. "This cannot be true," I shouted. Kelsey, one of the detectives, instructed me to sit down. "Please, Mr. Davis," she said firmly as she pulled out a chair for me. I didn't simply sit. I practically fell into the chair. They began asking how well I knew Abby before we married. Honestly, I didn't have much to say. I'd heard a few things about her past, but I didn't want to know more. What happened before did not affect how I felt when we were together. Even though I didn't want to believe what they said, I could see sympathy in their eyes. In the end, I kept quiet. The inspector stated, "Mr. Davis, we have a good reason for asking you these questions." He continued, "The man who was your wife's lover until recently has just fallen from a height of about 1,200 meters. Perhaps because of a parachute problem. This parachute belonged to a good friend." My face turned pale when I realized what he was saying. "I didn't pack it," I quickly explained, "and I haven't touched it since Sammy arrived." "Was he with her the entire time? Did she take the parachute when she went to the restroom?" the inspector inquired. "But I did nothing," I insisted. I would not do that. There were other people present who would have witnessed it. She only left for a minute or two." "It's fine, Robbie." Mark said as my voice became louder. "We are not accusing you of anything. Please understand that we need to ask these questions. Could you explain why you believe it was not an accident?" I told them everything Samantha had shared with me about the emails she discovered. I suggested she talk to the police about it, but I wasn't sure if she had. I explained how the company was set up. Gerald only had a salary to manage, and if he and Samantha split up, he risked losing his job because he lacked relevant experience. He would struggle to find a decent job. The inspector inquired what would happen if Mrs. Lloyd Smith were involved in this case today. I replied cautiously, saying I was unsure. I was wondering if Samantha had made a will. After a moment of thought, I said, "Let us assume she didn't. Gerald could end up extremely wealthy. Aside from the factory, there are 3 successful carpet stores under different names, as well as some good investments from her father. I assumed all of that would go to him. They wanted to know the total amount, and when I gave my estimate, their eyes widened. I was pleased that the focus of the questions was shifting to that area, and they had a lot of questions about Gerald. I was open about how much I disliked him, even admitting that I had hit him. I figured it was best to be honest because they might find out anyway. I quote him, not sure how long the questions lasted. After what seemed like an eternity, they decided they'd had enough for the time being. The sun was setting and they asked me to come to the police station the next morning with other witnesses. As I stood up shakily, Inspector Kelsey said, "One more thing, Mr. Davis." I expected him to ask an interesting question, but instead he asked the same question everyone asks about skydiving. He wanted to know how a rational person would jump out of a plane while it was still flying. I responded as most people do when the door is open. The investigation took a while. Mark told me that Detective Inspector Kelsey was extremely cautious and took his time with the case. Samantha and I were the target of a lot of suspicion. Her parachute's data card appeared to have been packed just last week before she went home, and my signature was on it. Samantha, quote, S husband confirmed this, saying he usually does it for her but hadn't touched it in weeks. He claimed Samantha and I were having an affair and that she was blackmailing me into leaving my wife, Abby. He claimed Samantha wanted me more than anything else, and then he insulted her. She was determined to do whatever it took to achieve her goals. She told him everything about it and even offered him a large sum of money if he agreed to the divorce. As a caring husband, his first thought was for his wife. He warned her not to get too close to people like me who grew up in a tough environment. He said we could do anything, but she didn't listen. She had always gotten her way and was able to bend things to her will. To put it mildly, it was a poor attempt. When the handwriting experts confirmed that the writing on the data card was not mine, everything fell apart. For Gerard. He became increasingly concerned as he was accused of attempting to murder his wife to obtain her money. He strongly denied it. When the police searched his laptop, he denied Samantha's story about emails to a secret woman who was assisting him in planning to harm her. They discovered it was new and barely used. He claimed it only needed an update. He explained that he cleaned up his old one and donated it to a charity that teaches older people how to use computers. This turned out to be true, but when the new owner discovered the laptop, it had a new hard drive, rendering it useless as evidence against him. The case against him was largely based on suspect evidence. He attempted to blame Samantha again. He admitted to having some brief affairs, claiming it was because she was uninterested in him. After the first few weeks of their marriage, it appeared that she was getting what she wanted from me. Samantha's emails claimed that a mystery woman promised endless pleasure, which was ridiculous. He had never considered doing any of those things and thought they were quite gross. The investigation appeared to come to a halt, despite the fact that the parachute had been tampered with and someone had attempted to harm Samantha. But I respected how the police worked, meticulously checking everything and calling each of us in to ask questions whenever something new arose. Nonetheless, it seemed like real progress was slow. By then, I was living on my own. When I got home that night after the accident, I found Abby drinking heavily. As soon as I walked in, she hugged me tightly and expressed her relief that I was safe. The local radio reported a fatal accident at the parachute club, but did not say who died. It's important to note that Joe died instantly in the fall. Unfortunately, when the rescue team arrived, they believed they saw some movement. It was difficult to tell if the body was simply settling or if something else was happening. Two people witnessed the incident, and one of them attempted to perform CPR. The new rule states that if CPR begins, it must continue until a doctor determines that the person is definitely dead. The official word will be that the person died before arriving at the hospital. The news may have jumped the gun, but they were not incorrect. At that point, Abby had no idea who had died. That was the first question she raised. I shook my head as I walked to the bathroom, instructing her to return to the living room and pour me a drink. I also promised to come out soon and fill her in. She needed to know. When I returned 10 minutes later, she was watching TV. It was showing a phone video of Joe falling from a long-distance. You couldn't tell who it was or whether it was male or female. It made sense that she assumed it was Samantha. Her parachute was very special. Yes, it was him, I replied. She turned to look at me as I picked up a glass of whiskey. Oh my God, I'm sorry, Robbie. I did not like her, but she did not deserve this, I replied coldly. She looked at me puzzled. So who was it? She inquired, her drink shaking in her hands. Someone who has been with you more often than I have. What do you mean? She asked quietly. It was Joe Carpenter. I spoke slowly and her face changed as tears began to fall. She eventually looked away, saying he was a good guy and that everything had happened a long time ago. A couple of months isn't very long. I responded softly, seeing her wince, but she attempted to deny it. I'm not sure what you're talking about. I dated him while we worked at the factory. It was never serious. Then she became angry, attempting to defend herself. Anyway, a man has just died. Can't you show a little concern, Abby? I said angrily. Care. What kind of care have you shown me? She snapped. Stop! I yelled, and she fell silent. You knew I was upset, so you went to the factory with him and others before you went to me. So do not lie about it. It is too late for that. I know the truth. Don't lie to me. Something appeared to change at that moment. She stopped crying and began discussing how we should honor those who have died, and how she had always loved me. If I hadn't been so weak, she would not have considered returning to him after our wedding. When I called her decision silly, she became enraged and said she would go to her sister until I recovered. I walked into the bedroom and returned to see her, attempting to put on her favorite leather jacket. I handed her the bag I had packed while she thought I was still in the bathroom. This should be enough for now. I said, you can return for the rest of your belongings in a few days. What? What do you mean? I mean, it is over. Abby, you are no longer in the present. Get out of my way before I do something we both may regret. You cannot do this, Robbie, she cried. You cannot abandon me like this. It is too late, I said, leading her to the door and opening it. Tomorrow morning, I will meet with a lawyer about the divorce, and I recommend that you do the same. For days, she begged me to take her back. When she realized it wouldn't work, she began to threaten me, claiming she'd ruin me. I remained calm and told her to contact my lawyer. He'd already told me that she couldn't take the apartment because it was mine before we got married. Furthermore, because we had no children and she worked, I didn't expect to have to pay her much, if anything, in the divorce. Meanwhile, as people at the factory learned what had happened, I began to hear stories about her time there. According to one supervisor and foreman, Abby was well known for her behavior there, particularly with a man named Joe Carpenter. There were a few others, but Joe was the only one who claimed he didn't require protection. I heard there were old rugs in the warehouse that were still referred to as Abby's bed, probably the same location where I had my first encounter with her. I also discovered that a few months after our wedding, she started going to the factory for lunch and taking Joe away for a while. If Joe wasn't present, she chose someone else. Most people thought I was foolish for marrying her, but they kept quiet. I couldn't do anything about it, but I remember everything. Finally, the police were determined and began to put the pieces together. They came to my house and asked if they could check the computers. I didn't hesitate to give them the 2 identical laptops that I had purchased for us. Personally, I was surprised they hadn't done this sooner. The inspection took about 10 days, and then everything changed. I'll never forget this Wednesday morning. I received a call from Detective Sergeant Mark Haley while I was at work. He politely requested that I arrive at the police station by 11 a.m. and bring Samantha along. I agreed and went to ask Sammy to join me. To be honest, I hadn't seen her much since the incident, despite the fact that we worked together. I knew she had kicked Gerald out of the house, and he had attempted to return while drunk, prompting her to obtain a restraining order against him. I also heard he was suspended from work but still received pay. Sammy, on the other hand, appeared withdrawn and was frequently lost in a nightmare. Even her beautiful golden hair seemed dull. I assumed that the memory of Joe Carpenter falling down bothered her, and she knew it could have been her when she agreed to accompany me. She appeared resigned. The ride was uncomfortable, and we barely talked. When we arrived, we were led into a spacious and surprisingly comfortable office. Mark Kelsey and the constable, who had taken our initial statements, were present. The only surprise was Abby's presence in the room. We were told that, while we were invited to assist with the investigation, we could have a lawyer if we desired. None of us expressed any interest in the idea. They showed us the recording devices they planned to use. I was the first to be called in. I was presented with 2 identical laptops and was required to select one. It was easy. Mine had a few minor scratches and a noticeable chip on the corner from being dropped while taking it out of its case. I had no problem claiming it and explaining why it was so simple to recognize. Then they asked if I had ever used Abby's laptop. I admitted that I had used it occasionally. I told them I knew we shouldn't leave valuable items in the car, but I did occasionally leave my laptop in the trunk. So when Abby wasn't at her computer and I needed to look something up, I used hers. I usually only used it to check news headlines, sports scores, and the like. Inspector Kelsey inquired, "Did you use it to send emails?" I replied that I always used my own for that. We shared a common email address for shopping and other purposes that worked on both computers, but I also had a personal email account that I used for messages to club members and occasionally to purchase surprise gifts. The 2 policemen exchanged glances. They both nodded slightly. Then they told me that I could leave if I wanted. I paused for a moment before saying, "If you don't mind, I'd rather stay." Mrs. Lloyd-Smith appeared shaken after what happened. I wasn't sure what they'd ask her, but I sensed she might need a friend by her side. I noticed Abby snort when I said friend, but I ignored it and saw Mark and Kelsey look at each other again. They appeared to understand each other well as they made a quick decision. They allowed me to stay, but I had to sit in a different chair further away from the table and promised not to speak. As I moved. I observed the others in the room as Kelsey took out a large stack of A4 paper. Sammy seemed tired and uninterested in what was going on. Abby appeared restless. I had no idea how long she'd been there before us, but I could tell she needed a cigarette. I remembered having to pay a lot to get the bad odor out of my apartment. Mrs. Lloyd-Smith. "Would you mind looking at this?" Inspector Kelsey spoke softly and smiled. "Please let me know if you know them. Take your time. I want you to be sure, so please read everything." He handed Sammy the stack of papers and she turned over the first page. I heard her gasp, followed by a sob that shook her petite frame. I wanted to get up, but they said I had to stay put. Sammy took a few deep breaths to calm down, and I knew she was fine when she turned to the next page. The room was quiet and tense as Sammy read. The only sounds are the ticking of the wall clock and the gentle whirring of the recording devices. There were 6 of us, and we could hear each other's breathing. It felt cool when we first arrived, but now I could feel sweat under my arms. As time passed, I attempted to get comfortable in the hard chair. Sammy must have read through the majority of the stack before looking up at the 2 officers and saying, "I've seen this before." These are the same letters I told Robbie about when I discovered them on Gerald's computer. "Do I really need to read them all? This is extremely important, Mrs. Lloyd-Smith." Inspector Kelsey replied, "I know this is difficult, but it would be extremely helpful if you could keep going. Please." As I concentrated on my task, I attempted to get Mark's attention, but he was staring at Sammy, so I looked at Abby to see how she felt about everything. Abby appeared restless, almost desperate for a cigarette. She couldn't see what Sammy was reading from where she sat, and I could tell she was getting carried away with her curiosity. The final few pages changed everything. First, Sammy let out a small gasp. Then she brought the page up close to her face, trying to figure out what it said next. She sighed, as if in pain, and quietly placed the last page on the pile of red papers. Sammy took out a small pack of tissues, pressed one against her face, and burst into tears. Abby yelled, "What's going on?" "What's on the papers and why am I here?" Kelsey responded calmly. "We'll be with you in a minute." But Abby wasn't happy about it. "No, that isn't good enough," she exclaimed. "I'm stuck here while you make her read nonsense and ignore me just because she has money." She pointed to me. "You both treat her like a princess, and I have no idea what's going on." "Okay, Mrs. Davis," Kelsey said firmly, his tone steady. "This made everyone quiet. Mrs. Lloyd Smith has been looking through emails found on your computer. These emails reveal that you and Mr. Smith planned not only an affair, but also the cold-blooded murder of his wife. It felt like a fish was suddenly taken out of water." Abby's mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. Her arms hung down at her sides, and I noticed her legs beginning to shake. She finally managed to cough it out. "This is not true. It is a mistake." "That's interesting," Kelsey said. Just then, as I moved to comfort a crying Sammy, she looked at me and said, "Tell them, Robbie, that I would not do that. You know, I wouldn't tell them if I didn't respond," and wrapped my arm around Samantha. She nearly screamed. "I'm not staying here to face accusations like that. I want to go home. I am leaving." She approached the door, but the officer was already blocking her path. Abby turned back to Mark and Kelsey, and the inspector said, "Very well. More charges may be imposed, but only for the time being. I'm arresting Abigail and Ruth Davis for the attempted murder of Samantha Lloyd Smith. You don't need to say anything, Dot." He went on to say that is when my wife fainted. I attempted to catch her before she hit the floor, but I figured it would be easier than what she planned to do to Sammy, so I only reached for her half-heartedly, which failed. God's work may take time, but it is complete and precise. In the months that followed, these words from Longfellow's poem came to mind frequently, especially while I was with the detectives investigating Joseph Carpenter's death. There was no rush to bring the case to trial, but it was clear that the situation was complicated and required expert opinions to determine whether it was murder. During this time, I convinced Samantha to take a break. When she returned, she appeared more relaxed. However, her enthusiasm for running the business had waned significantly. She began delegating most of the work to me. Freddie Watson, our primary salesperson, and Millicent Ferguson, her personal assistant who had worked for her father for many years, were both appointed to the board of directors. A few weeks later, when Gerald Smith finally admitted his role in the case, I expected Abby to confess soon. But Abby vehemently denied any involvement in it. After Gerald's admission, I assumed it would be simple to convict her, but I soon discovered that Mark was stalling proceedings because he was unsure of her role. He told me this when we met casually at a club one Saturday night and shared a quiet drink. He didn't say much, but I could tell he was skeptical. I wanted to inform him that Abby was a skilled liar. I'd seen it for myself. The way she concealed her activities was impressive. Looking back, I don't believe I missed many obvious signs at the time. Nonetheless, I wisely remained quiet. I discovered that she denied knowing anything about the potentially harmful letters or having any contact with Gerald Smith. The club was also struggling. Everyone was deeply affected by Joe's death. Membership was down, and team weekends, which had previously generated a lot of money, were becoming less common. Even chartering an aircraft became a burden, especially after the usual 3 flights per hour with up to 10 jumpers were reduced to just 1 flight with an average of 3 jumps. Some of us who were there that day continued to walk up the long, wide steps outside, but I believe the majority did so to prove to ourselves that we had not lost our courage. Samantha, for example, took 1 jump and declared it to be her final one. Mark did the same, and I've managed to complete 3 jumps since then. There was a club about 50 miles away looking to purchase parachute gear. They were also negotiating a lease for a clubhouse and other facilities with a small flying club. I was upset about it, but the attention we received suggested it was likely to happen. The courtroom was frightening. The room's grand style, combined with the lawyers wearing wigs, added to the serious atmosphere. They took their time going over everything that had happened on that tragic day, and it was simple to understand. Then they started talking about my wife and me, which made things much harder for me. Samantha had to read some papers that I saw for the first time. It was obvious why she was upset. Most of them were simply flirtatious messages. I believe many people participate in online chats. Initially, they went by the names Mistress and Bulldog, remaining anonymous. They discussed exciting adventures they wanted to take but couldn't because their partners weren't interested. I was asked if I knew my wife wanted to try these things after she said she couldn't get me to agree. I had to admit that she wanted exactly that. They eventually decided to reveal their true identities. Gerald stated that because he cared about me, he would be even more excited to play those games with her. Samantha, however, backed away. She claimed that if anyone discovered their conversations, it would mean the end of her marriage and the life I had provided for her. So she wanted to keep it as messages only for a long time. However, their discussions about what they wanted became more detailed and intense. They both clearly desired more thrilling experiences. He seemed very excited when she sent him a photo of herself in a leather outfit and high boots that she had made. His response demonstrated how much he enjoyed it, but things got worse when they discussed getting rid of their partners so they could be together. At first, they were cautious. Neither of them wanted to end their current lives. Things only became serious when Abby suggested that an accident would solve their problems. They never specified the type of accident, but it was clear they were considering something very bad. One message from Abby stated that she did not want to feel empty if she succeeded and suddenly found herself with a lot of money. They both agreed to insurance rules, which meant they'd be connected if everything went well. This promise was allegedly made, but no evidence of it was ever discovered. Gerald texted her the night before the accident, telling her that the following day would be a great time and that she should pretend to be somewhere else. She last contacted him on that day, reminding him that they needed to maintain their distance for at least 6 months until things settled down. Thankfully, there were short breaks during the trial, and the defense asked me questions. They wasted their time on me, but I remained true to myself and did not change my story. Everyone could tell I was sorry that the woman I loved had turned out to be cruel, and my pain was palpable. Nonetheless, I managed to exit the courtroom. Okay. In the coming days, I attended the trial where the prosecution presented their case. They demonstrated how letters were found hidden on Abby's computer. She had made mistakes in her writing, and her lack of capitalization matched her style. They also noted when the messages were sent, which were when she was at home, as well as photos of her in suggestive positions and similar ones sent to her by Gerald. It was all extremely harsh, but the worst part for her was Gerald Smith's statement, in which he admitted to everything. I suppose the defense lawyers were upset because she didn't confess, possibly hoping she'd blame a mental illness and receive a lighter sentence. However, she vehemently denied everything, and they had to work hard to counter the overwhelming evidence. She insisted on testifying, but she simply denied knowing anything about the letters. Any plans to harm Samantha or any contact with Gerald Smith? Even though the prosecution enjoyed challenging her, she stood firm, claiming that someone else was to blame and attempting to bring up Gerald's original story that Sammy was blackmailing me. Even though Gerald later admitted it was a lie, I was unable to attend the closing statements in court. I had to attend an extremely important business meeting that was critical to the company's future. The prosecution took a few hours to close their case, while the defense took slightly less time. So I was not present when the jury returned with the guilty verdict later that day. Murder is punishable by life in prison, with a minimum sentence of 30 years if it is done for profit. I heard Abby fainted when the sentence was read, and she became very upset a few days later when she found out her punishment. But I wasn't present to see it. I'd already told her that our time together was over, and there was no doubt about it. It was a beautiful day. I was sitting on the terrace of a villa near Grasse on the French Riviera. I had a lovely view of the lake, Mandalay Bay, and the hills surrounding me. I had a light lunch and relaxed with a cold glass of beer. I was delighted to reunite with a man I hadn't seen in nearly 8 years. Mark Harley was now the chief detective at Cheshire Police. He had gained some weight since our last meeting, but he still appeared healthy. The gray in his hair did not detract from his appearance. He was in Marseille working on a drug case and decided to contact me because I lived nearby. He found my phone number and asked to meet for a beer. I invited him to dinner with my family instead, and it was a pleasure to catch up. After dinner, my wife took care of the kids, allowing Mark and me to talk. He said my children, 4-year-old James and 2-year-old Claire, were great. He was correct. They were wonderful, and I adored them. "Don't you miss your home?" he asked. "Mark, this is your home now," I responded honestly. "We occasionally visit family there, but we cannot live there again. There are too many unpleasant memories, not enough sunlight." We both smiled and took a sip from our beverages. I suspected his visit was more important than he let on, but I decided to wait until he shared more. "How did you get on with her?" he asked, nodding at the house. I told him the truth. "Honestly, Mark, I never imagined we'd be together. We realized we had real feelings for each other after nearly a year. Without partners, we started spending time together at various events, but we'd both been hurt in the past and were afraid to feel again. Our feelings developed gradually until we were willing to admit we cared about each other, and it was true. We grew closer in the first year following the trial. I believe I became Samantha's support during a difficult time in her life, but I didn't want to jeopardize our friendship by pushing for more. Then one evening, after dinner with some Japanese businessmen and their wives, an opportunity arose. It was my turn to drive, despite the fact that she had not drunk much. As I was dropping her off at home and saying goodnight, she said, "You know, Robbie, I believe we spend more time together than most married couples." It was only a quick remark, but it kept everything quiet for a moment. Then, feeling shy, she began to get out of the car. When she turned back to face me, I gently held her hand. I told her I really enjoyed being with her. I wished we spent more time together. She examined me closely and asked if I truly meant it, when I said yes. We had our first real kiss. It wasn't wild, but it was gentle and filled with love. Following that, we began dating for real. We made a silent agreement not to rush into anything, and I was fine with it. Eventually, I reminded her of what she had said about spending more time together, and I suggested we consider taking things more seriously. That's when she decided to marry me. We had a 6-month engagement after many years of friendship. The wedding was a simple gathering of close family and friends. Our first night together was spent on our honeymoon in a hotel in Barbados. At first, it felt strange. We hadn't been with anyone in a long time and were both nervous. She didn't have to worry, though. When I saw her, she appeared even more beautiful than I had imagined. She had a lovely shape, and I felt incredibly fortunate to be with her. But she was shy and inexperienced. We both knew people who sought out adventurous activities. Gerald and Abigail's letters dealt with painful, unpleasant, and even illegal topics. We had to confront those memories and talk about them. So we did. During the first weeks of our marriage, we gradually discovered what we both enjoyed and wanted to forget. I told Mark about our traditional courtship, how we eventually decided to marry, and how our love grew every day. He smiled and asked if I had heard anything about my previous relationships. I shake my head. I didn't want to know they were from the past. Gerald appears to be doing well in prison, but I believe he has become a part of that life. I saw him several weeks ago. He still holds a grudge against Abigail, claiming it was her idea even though he agreed to it. He said she had promised to be the kind of girl he had always wanted, and he couldn't forgive her for not accepting responsibility for what had happened. He might be able to get out of prison in a few years, but I doubt he'll want to. Then I tried to stop him before he could say anything else, but he continued, saying Abby is a different story. She had a major breakdown. She maintains that she had nothing to do with the plan to harm Samantha. She even claims she is unaware of the letters that could get her in trouble. Doctors believe it is because she is in denial. Perhaps he or she has a mood disorder. There was a possibility that she had two sides to her personality and that the one in control had erased any memory of what the other did. This probably means she won't be released anytime soon. I mean, she knows that admitting the truth would improve her chances, but she refuses. That really makes you wonder, Robbie. He finished his drink and took another sip from his beer. "What's the question?" I asked calmly. He slowly set down his glass and asked me, looking me directly in the eyes, "How did you do it, Robbie?" I was surprised and apologized, but he only smiled a little. "Robbie, I'm a police officer," he explained. "I may not be as well known as Sherlock Holmes, but I give my all at work. I take my time and try to get everything right. I'm cautious because I dislike the idea of putting the wrong person in jail. Mr. Kelsey, do you remember him?" I nodded, and he continued. "Well, he worked differently than I did. He concentrated on producing quick results and making the numbers look good. In a significant case, such as Joe Carpenter's death, he wanted things done quickly and for people to see him in the news. It looks good. That's probably why he became chief of police. And I won't get a better job before I retire. Yes, comma, but please give me a few minutes, Robbie. It will not take long because my car will arrive soon. I have to discuss this because it has been bothering me for years. Okay. I nodded again and began to speak, but he raised his hand and told me to wait, so I remained silent. You see, when we were looking into things, I initially felt sorry for you. Do not get me wrong. You appeared to be a poor husband, blind to the truth, unaware that your wife was cheating on you with Joe and 2 factory workers, Donald and Malcolm. However, I began to realize I was mistaken, right? You knew all along, right? I tried to convey my embarrassment and anger. You were correct. Of course. That's why I got Abby a job outside of the factory. I expected it to help, but I knew it wouldn't. You're sharp. Robbie, I have to admit that as time passed, I began to see you more clearly and gradually. You drew Samantha in by outperforming her husband without judging him. You made her depend on you for business. Many men in your position may want to have an affair or prepare to replace Abby once they're done with her. Some may think that is incorrect, but I can see why they would understand it. But was that not enough for you? You came from a working-class family just like me, and you were angry inside. You escaped your past and achieved success and wealth, but you lost respect because of Abby's and her partner's actions. Is it true that you were mostly upset with Gerald Smith? He paused and waited for me to speak. I remained quiet and calm, asking him to continue because it was his story. Do not worry, Robbie. If I tried to prove it, I could end up like your ex. I am only doing this for myself. Do you see? Gerald clearly intended to harm the lovely Samantha. I believe the prospect of getting all that money was too appealing for him, so I wouldn't mind seeing him in jail. But what truly bothered me was how he was persuaded to do this. Things didn't fit properly, and I could tell something was wrong. That is why I attempted to delay the investigation. But Kelsey refused to let it happen. He hoped that solving the case would lead to his promotion. As soon as he realized I was stalling, he dismissed me rudely. Much later, after Abby denied knowing anything about those letters, I began to wonder if she had actually sent them. It got me thinking. Knowing Abby, I suspected she would have wanted to be involved with Gerald. I assumed that for all of their mistakes and excitement, someone cold and intelligent was behind it. That is not how I would describe Abby. And you never married her. I spoke calmly and he smiled. That is true. But allow me to propose an alternative story that everyone believed. Let's picture this. You carefully considered every option. You always pay close attention to detail. You could have devised a plan to ruin both Gerald and Abby, bringing you closer to the woman you truly desired. And, well, I'm not sure if it was luck or something else. Let's say you wanted to get rid of someone who had wronged you. Assume you established an email account on your wife's computer. She wouldn't find it because she wasn't very good at computers. You pretended to be her and began writing to Gerald. Let's also assume you gave her sleeping pills so she wouldn't notice. You knew she had some unusual wishes, so you played them up to get Gerald's attention. Imagine this. You copied her writing style, including minor errors, to make it appear as if she was part of a plan. I am not sure how you did it, but let us pretend you did. Consider how happy you must have been when Gerald believed it all. I'm not sure how you got Joe to wear the broken parachute or if that was part of your plan. And it wasn't just a small victory. You must have been overjoyed to see him board the plane carrying Samantha's parachute. You were cold enough to sit and watch him fall from the sky. I couldn't understand how you remained calm while being questioned. You knew the attention would soon shift from you to Gerald. When I reviewed my notes after the trial, I noticed you were the only one who did not inquire about Joe's well-being. Back then, I assumed you were simply smart enough to guess he didn't make it. But now I think you're glad he's gone. If I'm correct and I can never prove it, you could be the most heartless, calculating person I've ever met. That's saying something given my years on the job. You fell quiet after that, but your gaze remained fixed on mine. So I said Abby was very ill. Mark, you've built an entire story around the fact that she won't admit what she did. The truth is, she intended to ruin a good man for personal gain. She can't accept that her actions resulted in the death of someone she may have cared more about than she realized. You tell a good story, Mark, but I believe it was just a big fantasy that held you back. I don't have much else to say except that I hope you don't return here again. As I finished, I noticed a Renault Megane pull into the driveway and come to a stop under the terrace. We approached her, and before he got into the back seat, he turned and said, "You might have gotten away with it, Robbie. I don't believe you will ever have to pay for what you did, Dot. Unless there is another force waiting for you, I won't think about it again. I have my own life, and I doubt I would want to meet you anyway. Honestly, I think you're one of the most cruel and dangerous people I know. You don't appear to be sorry for what you've done, but I hope you'll consider how you treated Abby Dot. Maybe you'll remember how much you used to care for her. Do you think she has suffered enough?" I noticed the car driving away and turned to see Samantha waving from one of the windows. I returned to my drink and slowly finished it, thinking about what he had said. He was correct about many things, but he was completely wrong about one Dot. He believed Abby had suffered enough. The only good thing about Joe's death was that Samantha chose to speak to me rather than remain silent. I was confident that Joe and Donald would come for our parachutes. They were known for being frugal, saving money rather than paying rent. I didn't care whether Joe or Donald took Samantha's parachute. I also knew things weren't going well for Donald and Malcolm lately. After we sold the company to a Japanese company, they were unhappy with the changes, and several others felt the same way. They were viewed as troublemakers, and despite their experience, they were promptly dismissed. Am I dangerous? I am just an accountant, right? Samantha and I used some of the money to buy the house we now live in, and we still have enough left over to live comfortably just from interest. Old habits are difficult to break, so I continued to work from home, managing the finances of some of our wealthy neighbors. Samantha hurriedly approached me as I stood up. She looked so slim that it was difficult to tell she was pregnant with our third child. "Has Mark left?" she asked. "Yes," I chuckled as I recalled Old England. "He can stay there," she said, pretending to shiver. "Anyway, the kids slept during the day, so I thought." I raised my eyebrows and waited for her to laugh. Then she said, "No use making me ask you, sly fox. I'm going to nap for an hour." She then leaned in and gave me a gentle kiss on the lips, walking back to the door with elegance. By the time I went inside and shut the door, I had forgotten about Mark and everything that had happened before. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened.